The world is a frozen wasteland of death, littered with shattered blades and the ruins of a war that dragged on for 10 brutal years. Spitting up blood, a lone figure stares down at the ice, feeling the heavy, suffocating weight of his impending defeat. His chest heaves in agony as he grips a sword hilt, but no matter how hard he tries to breathe, his body is rapidly shutting down. Across from him, the elite warriors of the Holy Alliance let out exhausted sighs of relief, realizing they have finally cornered the monster. The self-proclaimed protectors of humanity had to pierce his body with dozens of sacred swords just to slow him down. They called him the ultimate plague of the land, the terrifying necromancer, Archimond. Struggling to stay upright on his knees, Archimond looks up through a curtain of blood, fully aware that he is standing at death's door. For a decade, the Imperial armies and an elite group of infiltrating knights fought a desperate war of attrition against his dark forces. He had prepared his defenses, but in the end, his grand campaign ended in a crushing, undeniable defeat. All his dark magic and his legions of the dead couldn't stop the inevitable tide of the Holy Crusade. And the man responsible for his downfall was none other than Berkel Reinland, the legendary leader of the Northern Knight Order. Berkel steps forward, his glowing holy sword resting on his shoulder as he looks down at his defeated foe. He calmly explains that this victory wasn't won by his hand alone, but through the blood and sacrifice of countless commoners. Archimond violently cuts him off, telling the Golden Knight to shut his mouth instead of preaching his high and mighty ideals. He yells that these noble knights stood by and did absolutely nothing while a devastating plague wiped out millions of innocent people. The two men lock eyes, their deep-seated hatred clashing in a silent battle of wills amidst the falling snow. Refusing to go down quietly, Archimond channels his remaining life force, summoning a massive surge of glowing green necromancy. The surrounding knights instantly panic, realizing the dying devil is preparing to cast one final, devastating spell. One of the elite knights urges Berkel to execute him immediately, but the Golden Commander calmly tells them to hold their ground. Archimond summons the glowing souls of the 20 million citizens who died from the plague, turning them into a horrifying army of skeletal soldiers. That tragic plague and the horrific military response were the very events that ignited this entire continent-spanning war. Archimond grits his teeth, sneering at the holy leader's attempt to paint this slaughter as a righteous crusade. He points out that Berkel's own family was among those 20 million victims, exposing the knight's pure desire for personal revenge. Berkel remains dead silent as the cold winter wind rushes past, refusing to offer a single word of denial. Slowly raising his blade, the Golden Knight prepares to end the conflict once and for all. He flatly declares that his personal feelings don't matter, and that he is doing this strictly to secure a peaceful future for the children. Archimond is completely stunned by the sheer, unyielding conviction radiating from the man who ruined his life. For a brief moment, the legendary necromancer freezes, unable to comprehend a man who willingly discards his own ego for a greater cause. Looking into Berkel's eyes, Archimond sees his own battered, monstrous reflection staring back at him. Suddenly, the darkened storm clouds part as a brilliant beam of holy light pierces the sky, illuminating the frozen battlefield. Bathed in the divine glow, Berkel looks like a true savior, reinforcing the painful reality of Archimond's complete defeat. With his mana completely exhausted and his body broken, Archimond finally collapses onto the blood-stained ice. Accepting his fate, the defeated lord tells the knight to get it over with and deliver the final blow. To everyone's shock, Berkel throws his legendary holy sword into the snow and draws a standard runic steel blade instead. He steps forward, raising the cold steel over his nemesis's neck, and asks if he has any final words. Archimond lets out a raspy, ominous whisper, reminding the knight that a master of the dark arts doesn't perish so easily. With a sudden, violent slash, the heavy steel blade cuts cleanly through the cold winter air. Black blood sprays across the white snow as Archimond is cleanly decapitated, ending his reign of terror. Berkel stands motionless, his sword lowered as the dark energy slowly dissipates from the field. As his vision begins to fade into darkness, Archimond's severed head catches a final glimpse of his killer. The cold steel blade drips with his blood, cementing the finality of his execution. A massive wave of cheers echoes across the battlefield as the holy knights celebrate the official death of the devil. Staring blankly at the sky from the frozen ground, the legendary necromancer is forced to listen to his enemies rejoice. Even as his consciousness slips away, the sound of his own head thudding onto the ice rings clearly in his ears. And just like that, the grueling 10-year war officially comes to an end, cementing the fall of the Dark Lord. The world would forever remember the name of Archimond as a symbol of absolute ruin. His soul is dragged through a swirling, infinite void of darkness, drifting aimlessly through the passage of time. 200 years later, a violent thunderstorm rages over a massive, incredibly luxurious noble manor. Inside, a pair of maids gasp in absolute shock, pointing excitedly at the crib as they notice the newborn baby's mouth twitching. The tiny infant tries to formulate a thought, utterly confused by his sudden, bizarre lack of motor skills. The maids coo over the newborn, warmly welcoming the young master, who they call Lord Klein, back to the waking world. They hold up a golden mirror showing a portrait of a beautiful blonde duchess, proudly declaring her to be his new mother. One of the maids leans in close, encouraging the chubby baby to try and say his very first word. Struggling against his stiff, tiny limbs, the baby grits his gums, determined to assert his absolute dominance. Instead of crying, the infant throws his tiny fists in the air and screams a high-level necromancy summoning spell at the top of his lungs. The terrified maid instantly drops her rattle, her eyes widening in pure horror at the baby's demonic chanting. Right on cue, a massive bolt of blue lightning splits the stormy night sky with an incredibly loud crack. The lightning strike crashes violently onto the mansion's courtyard fountain, leaving the servants utterly convinced the baby is cursed. 15 long, incredibly awkward years pass by in the blink of an eye. The storm clouds have cleared, and the Grand Estate's fountain now flows peacefully under a bright, clear sky. A group of maids huddle near the garden, giggling and whispering excitedly to one another as they spot someone approaching. An elegant young man in polished leather shoes walks past, his silver hair catching the warm sunlight. The maids swoon, whispering that his stunning looks make him look like a masterpiece directly sculpted by the gods themselves. This gorgeous young noble is Klein Reinland, the reincarnation of the terrifying necromancer, now living as a 15-year-old boy. Klein keeps a completely deadpan expression, trying his best to ignore the endless gossiping of the estate staff. Suddenly, a massive shadow looms over him, and a stream of cold water begins pouring down directly over his head. A towering, hypermuscular priest dumps an entire bucket of water on him, roaring for the evil spirits to leave his body. The priest squinting his eyes, claiming he distinctly saw a brief flash of Archimond's demonic gaze on the boy's face. This terrifyingly buff man is Priest Veerman Garrison, a high-ranking member of the Holy Order who looks more like a mercenary than a healer. The maids let out tiny squeals of panic and quickly scatter as Klein stands there, completely drenched and deeply annoyed. With the metal bucket resting directly on his head, Klein dryly asks if the priest ever gets tired of performing these completely useless rituals. Garrison insists it's highly necessary, explaining that Archimond's wicked soul is trapped inside Klein's body and must be purified weekly. When Klein flatly points out that he isn't the dead Dark Lord, Garrison yells in triumph and sprays a stream of holy water directly into his eyes. Klein wipes the water from his face, seriously questioning if this massive holy man has completely lost his mind. Muttering a string of insults under his breath, Klein turns on his heel and tries to walk away from the lunatic. Garrison immediately spots his escape attempt and barks an order to his temple guards to capture the fleeing young master. Klein sprints for his life across the courtyard, screaming that his name is Klein as the priest threatens him with a naked holy bath. Drifting in a mental sea of peaceful blue bubbles, Klein reflects on the absolute tragedy that is his current reincarnation. Because he accidentally screamed a Dark Lord incantation as a baby, his family branded him a demon and locked him in a monastery at age 3. As a child, he spent years huddled in a dark, cold cell wondering why his legendary second life had started so horribly. And then, his childhood isolation was interrupted by the looming, terrifying silhouette of a priest from the Holy Order. Garrison stood at the door of his cell, offering a deeply unsettling, scarred smile that promised a lifetime of absolute torment. And that was just the beginning of his misery, starting with 24-hour prayer chants that left Kid Klein weeping tears of pure exhaustion. Then came the freezing garlic baths, designed to cleanse his skin but mostly just leaving him smelling like a highly seasoned soup. And if that wasn't enough, Garrison regularly tied him to a massive wooden cross surrounded by holy flames for a dramatic purification show. For 7 agonizing years, the monastery echoed with Klein's desperate screams for mercy under the guise of holy healing. Now, 5 years after finally leaving that hellhole, Klein sits on the floor with a stupid party hat, looking completely dead inside. A gentle voice echoes through the room, praying that their young master will grow up to be a shining, righteous hero. His adorable red-haired maid, Erin, clasps her hands together in deep, heartfelt prayer for his health. Erin is Klein's personal maid, and she is incredibly loyal, even if her prayers are a little too loud for his liking. Staring blankly under the ridiculous animal party hat, Klein's bloodshot eyes show the sheer depth of his emotional exhaustion. Unable to take it anymore, Klein snatches the paper hat off his head and hurls it across the room in a fit of rage. Erin gasps in absolute heartbreak, her eyes welling with tears as she stares at the discarded paper cone. Klein instantly feels a massive wave of guilt wash over him, realizing he might have been a bit too harsh on his sweet maid. He bends down to pick up the handmade hat, only for Aaron to casually mention that Priest Garrison was the one who spent a week knitting it. Klein instantly freezes mid-motion, his hand hovering over the paper cone like it's a highly toxic explosive. His face contorts into an expression of pure, unadulterated horror and disgust as he stares at the priest's handiwork. Right on cue, the massive frame of Priest Garrison steps into the room, looming over the young master with a terrifyingly gentle presence. Dabbing a single dramatic tear from his eye, the muscular priest sniffs and claims he is deeply moved to see Klein wearing his gift. Klein immediately rips the hat to shreds with a veins-popping smile, flatly declaring that there is absolutely no way he is wearing it. Garrison yells that the demon's evil soul has manifested again, while Klein screams at the priest to give him back his wasted guilt. The chaotic shouting is interrupted by a polite bow from Dunkel, the stern captain of the Red Chariot Knight Order. Dunkel lets out a nervous sweat, politely pointing out that the rumors of Klein being a demon are over a decade old at this point. Even the High Temple cleared Klein of all charges, yet the crazy priest is still letting the boy claw at his face in pure frustration. With a casual flick of his wrist, Garrison effortlessly tosses Klein onto the floor like a sack of potatoes, dusting off his robes. Lying face down on the carpet, Klein grits his teeth, furious that the priest acts completely civilized only when a knight captain is watching. The scarred priest offers a polite nod to the captain, turning around to make his grand exit, but as he turns his head slightly, Garrison's eyes narrow into a cold, incredibly calculating stare. He quietly notes that in their line of work, there is always a lingering possibility of a dark soul returning. With those ominous words hanging in the air, the massive holy man slowly steps out of the room. He pops his head back through the doorway with a cheerful wave, reminding Klein to wash up thoroughly for their next purification session on Friday. Klein lets out a furious roar, veins bulging on his forehead as the priest disappears down the hallway. With a heavy sigh of absolute defeat, the silver-haired teen collapses onto the plush sofa, completely exhausted from the mental gymnastics. He loudly complains to the ceiling, questioning if a holy man is legally allowed to torture a minor so consistently. Aaron walks over with a fresh, clean towel, offering a highly concerned look as she asks if he is truly not the Dark Lord. Klein waves his hand dismissively, offering a smooth, well-rehearsed lie about how much he absolutely despises even hearing that name. Internally, however, he knows that if he ever admits his true identity, Garrison will probably upgrade his torture to a literal volcanic bath. Ever since his bizarre rebirth, he has lived under constant, suffocating surveillance, locked away from the world due to his babyhood slip-up. He clutches his hair in frustration, while Aaron quietly notes that despite his bizarre behavior, Garrison is actually a highly respected proxy. Aaron tilts her head in adorable confusion, asking if a proxy is simply some kind of incredibly high-ranking nobleman. Captain Dunkel gazes out the window, his expression turning incredibly serious as he prepares to explain the true power of the clergy. He explains that the title of proxy is reserved strictly for the absolute strongest warriors within the entire Holy Order. As Garrison walks down the grand corridor, his massive, hyper-muscular back makes the surrounding servants look like literal insects. Aaron cheers in excitement, while Klein, sitting on the couch, prepares to ask a much more pressing question about his new family. Drying his silver locks with a towel, Klein quietly asks the captain who the absolute strongest fighter in the Reinland family is. Dunkel smiles warmly, noting that while the current 7th Duke is exceptionally powerful, the absolute strongest is undoubtedly. Before the captain can finish his sentence, Klein interrupts with a cold, absolute tone. With a sharp, intense gaze, the silver-haired boy states that the 1st Duke is, and always will be, the undisputed strongest. Aaron giggles happily, teasing her young master for clearly being a massive fanboy of the family's legendary founder. She points out that even now, Klein is staring intensely at the massive oil portrait hanging on the far wall. Dunkel nods in agreement, reflecting on the historical fact that it has been exactly 200 years since the founder established their house. Klein's eyes narrow to sharp slits as he stares at the painted canvas, a wave of bitter irony washing over him. His eyes drift past the gilded portraits of the 5th, 4th, and 3rd Dukes of the Reinland lineage. He bypasses the shadow-draped painting of the 2nd Duke, focusing entirely on the topmost frame. The painted face of a handsome blonde man with a fur-lined collar and a cold, piercing gaze stares back at him. The gold plaque beneath the portrait clearly reads, 1st Duke, Berkel Reinland. Klein lets out a slow, deeply ironic smirk, realizing he has been reincarnated as the direct descendant of the very man who cut his head off. Inside his sleeping mind, the dark, blood-stained memory of his execution replays in vivid, agonizing detail as he screams his killer's name. The painted face of Berkel Reinland flashes before him, repeating his righteous speech about sacrificing his life for the future. The memory of the dark, sweeping blade cutting through his vision forces his heart to pound frantically against his ribs. The cold, detached eyes of the Golden Knight are the very last thing he remembers before his consciousness was shattered. With a gasp of pure panic, Klein snaps awake in his massive bed, his body drenched in cold sweat and his chest heaving. He sits upright in the quiet, dimly lit bedroom, clutching his forehead as he tries to calm his racing heart. Rubbing his temples, the silver-haired teen mutters about what an absolute garbage dream he had to endure. 200 years ago, he was Archimond, the terrifying devil of the continent, but now he is forced to live as the spawn of his sworn enemy. Staring at his reflection, he sighs in frustration, admitting he still hasn't gotten used to having this ridiculous silver hair. The heavy wooden door slowly creaks open, and a towering, incredibly familiar muscular silhouette blocks the light. Garrison stands at the threshold with a smug grin, dryly asking if Klein was busy dreaming about his good old days as the Dark Lord. Klein's face goes completely blank as he decides his best course of action is to play completely dumb in front of this muscular lunatic. Before he can reply, Aaron bursts into the room like a miniature hurricane, grabbing him by the shoulders with a panicked expression. With wide, dramatic eyes, the red-haired maid screams that she distinctly heard every single word of his sleep-talking. To Klein's absolute horror, Aaron starts physically reenacting his evil speech, mimicking a Dark Lord commanding his legions to destroy the continent. The highly embarrassing performance is interrupted by a knock from Butler Veerman, who announces that the family swordsmanship demo is starting. Garrison's aura instantly erupts into a roaring fire of holy wrath as Klein quickly covers Aaron's mouth, desperately trying to save them both. As they head out, Klein internally curses the crazy priest, wishing he could summon a swarm of undead just to swallow the man whole. The massive, castle-like estate of House Reinland basks under the warm afternoon sun, surrounded by manicured hedges and stone pathways. A trio of polished leather shoes clicks in perfect unison against the immaculate marble floors of the grand corridor. The elderly butler walks alongside Klein, politely explaining that the Duke has requested his presence at today's swordsmanship gathering. Aaron trots beside them, completely forgetting the demon crisis as she spots a snack package and begs Klein for a treat. The butler turns around to scold the maid for her poor manners, while Klein casually hands her a sweet cookie anyway. Aaron happily munches on the cookie, her cheeks puffing out like a squirrel as she ignores the butler's stern sighs. Klein asks what this sudden gathering is about, noting that his cold, distant father has never once invited him to a public event before. The butler lowers his gaze, quietly explaining that several prominent members of the branch families have arrived at the estate. Klein's eyes narrow slightly, instantly understanding the political headache that is waiting for him in the grand hall. As they enter the ballroom, a pair of smug, golden-haired branch family nobles immediately spot Klein and point at him with mocking grins. The surrounding crowd of distant relatives chuckles quietly, mockingly referring to the silver-haired boy as Lord Archimond. They loudly whisper about how he spent 7 years rotting away in a garbage monastery, warning each other not to get cursed. Klein's eyes scan the room, identifying his annoying maternal cousins on one side and some incredibly plump northern cousins stuffing their faces with chicken. Through the crowd, his gaze lands on a striking blonde woman sitting elegantly in a plush leather armchair. She sits with her leg crossed, wearing high-heeled boots and thigh-high stockings, looking completely bored by the surrounding nobles. Klein walks past the whispering crowd with a completely detached expression, ignoring their cheap attempts to get a reaction out of him. One of the blonde cousins sneers, highly offended that a manaless failure has the nerve to completely ignore his family elders. The arrogant relatives step forward, shouting angrily at his back and demanding he show some respect to the family bloodline. Staring forward with a cold, piercing gaze, Klein dryly notes that he doesn't even know their names and reflects on his family's rapid decline. Suddenly, a massive, violent shockwave of wind slices across the center of the training arena, drawing everyone's attention. In the middle of the ballroom, two young swordsmen clash violently, their training weapons letting out a loud, ringing metallic sound. Dalton, the purple-haired branch family fighter, grits his teeth in frustration as he struggles to hold his ground. With a swift, elegant parry, his opponent effortlessly forces Dalton's sword down, completely shattering his guard. Refusing to accept defeat in front of the entire family, Dalton roars in frustration and prepares to swing wildly. His opponent moves like a blur, landing a rapid succession of precise, painful strikes that leave Dalton completely overwhelmed. Standing calmly amidst the dust, the golden-haired victor offers a gentle, incredibly polite smile that masks his absolute dominance. This perfect prodigy is Klein Reinland, the eldest son of the family, and Klein's exceptionally talented older half-brother. Thanks to Klein's overwhelming genius, the proud reputation of House Reinland is barely managing to stay afloat in the empire. Dalton charges forward for one last desperate strike, determined to salvage whatever is left of his bruised ego. As Klein watches from the balcony, his eyes suddenly flash with a brilliant, incredibly intense shade of deep purple. Dalton calmly raises his wooden blade, waiting for the perfect, split-second opening in his opponent's clumsy attack. With a sudden burst of yellow mana, Dalton slips past the strike, moving with an unmatched level of grace and speed. Through his newly awakened purple eyes, Klein can see everything: the exact footwork, the precise timing of the push-off, and the muscle tension. Dalton's face turns pale with panic as he realizes his opponent has completely vanished from his line of sight. Dalton draws his sword back, his body glowing with a brilliant blue aura as he channels his family's highly guarded energy flow. With a single, devastating swing, he unleashes the legendary Meteor Sword technique, creating a massive explosion of light. When the dust settles, the wooden sword rests gently against Dalton's throat, signaling an absolute and effortless victory. Dalton lowers his weapon with a polite bow, quietly telling his cousin that pushing his limits any further would be highly problematic. The surrounding branch family members sweat nervously, murmuring in awe at the young prodigy's terrifying mastery of the family technique. Klein rubs his eye in slight confusion, wondering what that strange, tingling sensation in his vision was during the duel. A loud, booming voice calls out his name from beneath the grand, glittering crystal chandelier of the ballroom. Dalton spots his younger brother and jogs over with a warm, genuine smile, asking how long he has been standing there. Scratching the back of his neck, the golden child blushes slightly, wishing his little brother had told him he was watching so he could have tried harder. Klein stares at him with a deadpan look, noting that his brother possesses perfect skills, stunning looks, and a great personality. A deep, commanding voice interrupts their conversation, praising Dalton's flawless execution of the family's secret art. An elegant man with long, wavy brown hair and sharp features steps forward. This is Berkel Reinland, the current seventh head of the family. Dalton immediately stands at attention to greet his father, while Klein remains standing a few paces back, his expression guarded. Berkel rests a hand on his eldest son's shoulder, offering a rare, genuine smile of pride as he praises his immense dedication. For the weary family head, Dalton's overwhelming genius is the absolute last source of pride keeping their household together. Dunkel steps forward, noting that knights twice Dalton's age wouldn't even dare to attempt a technique with such complex mana control. Dalton looks down modestly, politely claiming that his current skills are still far from being truly sufficient. Berkel looks out over the crowd, proudly reciting the legendary dying words of the first Duke, Berkel Reinland, about family supremacy. Dalton bows his head in deep respect, promising to engrave those words into his heart for the rest of his life. Berkel's gaze slowly shifts away from his golden son, landing directly on his silent, silver-haired second child. Klein stands perfectly still under his father's cold gaze, a single bead of sweat rolling down his cheek. Slowly raising his hand, the Duke reaches out and places his palm gently on top of Klein's silver head. After a long, incredibly tense silence, Berkel lets out a heavy, disappointed sigh, noting that he still can't feel a single drop of mana. Klein lowers his head in a polite apology, fully aware that in this family, a child without mana is viewed as nothing but a useless burden. Dunkel tries to defend the boy, gently reminding the Duke that Klein spent his most critical training years locked away in a damp monastery. The surrounding branch family relatives immediately begin snickering, loudly whispering about the second son's complete lack of talent. They smugly note that with the direct line producing such a pathetic failure, the branch families will have to step up and take control. Klein quietly walks away from the crowd, clutching his fist tightly as he hears his family's proud name being dragged through the dirt. He recalls his killer's final words about sacrificing everything to secure a peaceful future for his beloved descendants. His knuckles turn white as his hand shakes with a mixture of dark amusement and genuine, simmering rage. Looking at the pathetic, bickering crowd of nobles, he sneers internally, wondering if Berkel sacrificed his life just for these greedy pigs. The Duke and Dalton walk ahead, completely ignoring the second son as the arrogant relatives continue to mutter behind his back. Suddenly, the bruised and battered Dalton blocks his path, folding his arms with a deeply unpleasant, mocking grin on his face. Dalton sneers, loudly calling Klein an absolute disgrace to the family name who has no right to act so high and mighty. Staring at him with a deadpan look, Klein calmly asks if Dalton's version of family pride involves paying off young maids to hush up his scandals. Dalton's smug face instantly flushes red with pure panic, and he aggressively demands to know where Klein heard such lies. As Dalton lunges forward in a blind rage, Klein casually raises his foot, placing it perfectly in the path of the cousin's boots. With a loud, incredibly satisfying thud, Dalton trips over the simple block and goes flying forward, face-planting directly onto the hard floor. Coughing up a bit of dust, Dalton pushes himself up, his face twisted in pure, unadulterated fury as he screams a stream of curses. He roars that Klein is nothing but a worthless, pathetic bastard who doesn't even know the face of his own mother. Klein instantly stops in his tracks, his eyes glowing with a terrifying, cold purple light that makes the temperature in the hallway drop. Dalton's screaming immediately cuts off as he looks into those eyes, his body completely freezing under a wave of genuine murderous intent. Staring at the wall, Klein notes that his rage has nothing to do with his mother, but with the Branch family's cheap, unearned arrogance. His left eye flashes with a dark, crackling energy, a remnant of his past life's supreme magic threatening to tear through his seal. The abstract, swirling, dark shadow of Archimond's soul looms heavily in his mind, reacting to his intense desire to crush the insects before him. Before things can escalate, Captain Dunkel steps firmly between the two boys, his towering presence immediately breaking the tension. With a cold, unwavering voice, the Knight Captain flatly warns Dalton that he will not tolerate any further disrespect toward the young master. Dalton scoffs, gritting his teeth in frustration as he realizes he can't touch the boy with an elite knight standing guard. Turning on his heel, the purple-haired cousin spits out a final insult, calling Klein a coward who has to hide behind his bodyguard. Dalton stomps away down the hallway, gesturing wildly as the surrounding servants watch his humiliating retreat. Dunkel slowly releases his grip on his sword hilt, letting out a quiet, controlled breath as the threat walks away. Klein stares silently at the polished hilt of the captain's blade, a deep, highly analytical spark lighting up his eyes. The captain looks back at him, wondering what could possibly be going through the quiet, silver-haired boy's mind. Later that night, under a dark moonlit sky, the two figures walk out into the vast, quiet forest surrounding the estate. Dunkel steps forward, politely handing a standard, double-edged steel training sword over to the young master. The captain asks why Klein suddenly requested a real weapon at such an incredibly late hour of the night. Klein lifts the blade, turning it slowly in the moonlight as he asks if Dellen's swings earlier in the day looked like this. He offers a brief, casual wave, telling the captain to head back inside first while he takes a moment to check a few things. Dunkel bows and slowly walks away, quietly pitying the young master for having such a sad, lingering attachment to the sword. He knows that without a single drop of mana, Klein is physically incapable of ever becoming a knight, let alone replicating the Duke's meteor sword. Left entirely alone in the windy, quiet clearing, Klein stands perfectly still, letting the tip of his blade rest near the grass. He slowly closes his eyes, letting his mind drift back to the duel he witnessed earlier in the grand ballroom. In the darkness of his mind, the memory of Dellen's precise footwork and the timing of his push-offs play back in perfect, glowing detail. The exact arc of the blade and the flow of energy trace themselves across his consciousness with absolute crystalline clarity. His eyes snap open, crackling with a terrifying, brilliant surge of purple magic that violently shatters the surrounding wind. Halfway down the path, Dunkel stops dead in his tracks, his eyes widening as he feels a sudden, unbelievably massive wave of pressure. He turns around in sheer disbelief, his pupils dilating as a blinding violet light illuminates the dark forest canopy. With a single, blindingly fast vertical slash, Klein unleashes a massive, roaring shockwave of purple energy directly at a giant stone boulder. His eyes glow with a sharp crack pattern of absolute power, completely devoid of the physical strain that normally accompanies such a technique. The massive wave of dark purple energy slices cleanly through the solid stone, leaving a glowing trail of heat in its wake. With a thunderous crash, the giant boulder splits perfectly in half, the smooth, sliced edges crumbling into the dirt. Dunkel stands completely frozen in the shadows, his jaw dropping as he stares at the silver-haired boy standing calmly amidst the rubble. Looking down at his training blade with a slow, deeply satisfied smirk, Klein chuckles to himself, realizing his supreme memory works perfectly. To survive in a world ruled by your mortal enemy's descendants, you have to be ready to play the fool, even if it means getting treated like a literal house pet. Priest Garrison peers down with an intensely serious, sweating face, looking for any trace of the Dark Lord's lingering shadow. Meanwhile, our boy Klein is currently head-first in a bucket of water, bubbling away like a broken water pipe. Garrison proudly boasts that the young master can hold his breath underwater for over a minute now, while Aaron happily claps and calls him a literal fish. Klein snaps his head up, gasping for air as Garrison casually wonders if they should upgrade the next purification ritual to a giant glass fish tank. Klein screams at the top of his lungs, demanding to know why today's torture session took even longer than usual. With a hearty, booming laugh, Garrison explains that he felt an incredibly ominous aura radiating from Klein's bedroom today. Coughing up water as Aaron hands him a dry towel, Klein realizes that ominous aura is just ancient holy code for "I felt like giving you a light drowning today." Just then, a servant steps into the grand room, interrupting the chaotic holy bath. He politely steps forward, holding out a sealed envelope addressed directly to the young master. The guard explains that Dalton, the arrogant branch cousin who got absolutely embarrassed on the training grounds a few days ago, has sent a formal invitation to apologize. Klein instantly recalls Dalton's pathetic, raging face from their last hallway encounter, and a massive red flag goes up in his mind. Staring at the fancy paper, Klein sneers internally at the sheer absurdity of Dalton suddenly wanting to play nice and apologize. The invitation asks him to attend a private hunting competition, which seems highly suspicious considering Dalton's massive ego. Our guy immediately realizes this is just a poorly disguised excuse to lure him away from the safety of the main Reinland manor. He looks up from the letter and tells the guard there's absolutely no reason to decline a free invitation. He glances over at the dark steel training sword leaning quietly against the pillar. After all, he's not the same defenseless kid they locked in a monastery anymore. That simple sword is about to become a highly dangerous weapon in the hands of a former Dark Lord. Over the past few days, Klein has been replaying his brother Dellen's advanced swordsmanship over and over in his mind. With his newly awakened purple eye, he can break down the flow of energy and muscle movements of any technique instantly. He knows for a fact that he can perfectly replicate any physical skill he has seen just once, proven by that massive forest boulder he split in half. The guard looks at him in complete silence, completely unaware of the terrifying prodigy standing right in front of him. The guard nods, stating he will prepare a carriage for the trip, but a massive shadow looms over them. Garrison cheerfully offers to tag along, causing Klein to completely lose his cool and point scream at the priest to stay away from him. Klein glares at him with a deadpan expression, silently begging the universe to send this muscular priest to a different continent. Garrison keeps a perfectly serious face, reiterating his duty to protect the young master's soul. He dryly adds that he's sensing yet another highly ominous aura today, which is incredibly convenient for his travel plans. With no other choice, the group boards the carriage, rolling deep into the dense, overgrown western forest. The wooden carriage wheels bump violently along the rough dirt trail, shaking the passengers inside. Inside, poor Erin is completely carsick, resting her head on Garrison's massive lap while Klein watches with a look of pure judgment. Klein rolls his eyes, reminding her he told her to stay home, before tossing his personal leather pillow toward the priest's seat. He looks out the window, noting the terrain in this part of the forest is notoriously rough on first-timers. Garrison catches the pillow, staring at it in deep, silent contemplation. The giant priest gets incredibly teary-eyed, touched that the young master has grown up to be so caring, only for Klein to snap that the pillow was strictly for Aaron, not him. Klein leans against the window pane, completely ignoring the priest's dramatic sniffles as the carriage continues its bumpy ride. He gazes out at the lush, green canopy, reflecting on how much this land has transformed. In his past life, this entire area was a frozen, desolate wasteland covered in nothing but snow, blood, and the corpses of his fallen army. He touches his cheek, a wave of cold nostalgia washing over him. He remembers Berkel Reinland, the legendary hero who fought so desperately to turn this blood-soaked ice sheet into a green paradise. The carriage door suddenly swings open as Captain Dunkel announces their arrival at their destination. The grand and unbelievably lavish Cornwell family estate looms before them, looking more like an imperial palace than a branch house. Klein steps out of the carriage with a cold look, while Erin continues to loudly throw up her breakfast in the background. He notes that this branch family mansion is somehow far more luxurious than the actual main Reinland estate. It's clear they have plenty of extra money to waste on throwing highly expensive parties for noble teenagers. A smug, highly annoying voice suddenly echoes across the stone courtyard, calling out his name. Dalton steps forward with a mocking grin, holding the heavy leashes of several massive, drooling, red-eyed guard dogs. He smugly boasts about his high ceilings and thick walls, brag complaining that they only have this much cash because they squeezed it out of the main family line. The beasts let out low, vicious snarls, their sharp teeth gleaming in the sunlight. Klein casually points out that the dogs are clearly emaciated and starved, dryly asking when this hunting competition became an open-air therapy session. Dalton's grin twitches, calling Klein an impatient bastard, and says he prepared a special show just for him. With a casual flick of his wrist, Dalton drops the heavy iron chains onto the stone tiles. The pack of starved, vicious beasts immediately bolts forward, sprinting toward the mountains with rabid speed. Dalton explains that he scattered raw meat bait all over the middle of the mountain to get them moving. He proudly lectures Klein that a starving predator's sense of smell is up to 100,000 times stronger than a human's. With a sadistic smirk, Dalton draws his bow, aiming at the running pack with absolute coldness. With a sharp twang, the arrow flies through the air, piercing one of the running dogs instantly. He ruthlessly ruthlessly shoots down his own starved animals for target practice as they scramble for the bait. Sarcastic comment, ah yes, the absolute pinnacle of noble sportsmanship, shooting your own chained pets. Dalton bursts into hysterical laughter, boasting about his highly successful and righteous hunt to the surrounding crowd. Arin runs over to check on the noise, drawing the purple-haired cousin's attention away from his bow. Dalton walks over, placing a highly condescending hand on Erin's head as she looks up at him with pure dislike. He sneers, loudly asking what a useless little brat like her could possibly do to keep Klein entertained. He grips her hair, smugly offering to give her a real job to do around his lavish estate. Before he can even pull her away, a hand grabs Dalton's wrist with a bone-crushing grip that completely halts his movement. Klein stands there, his eye glowing with a terrifying, icy purple light as he calmly tells Dalton to let go before he breaks his arm in half. Dalton violently tears his hand away, thoroughly rattled by the sheer physical strength of the supposedly manaless boy. Dalton yells at Klein to stop acting tough, his face turning red with embarrassment in front of his guards. He quickly mounts his horse, kicking his boots into the stirrups. He sneers down at Klein, telling him to follow him deep into the forest trail if he actually has the guts to finish this. Klein hops onto his own horse, telling Dunkel to wait at the entrance with Erin and strictly ordering him not to follow. Dunkel tries to protest, but Klein halts him by holding up a crumpled, ancient-looking paper scroll. Dunkel looks at it in surprise, recognizing the distinctive crescent star symbol on the parchment. This is a signal magic scroll, a highly valuable one-time use item that triggers a crest even without traditional mana when torn. Klein whispers that Garrison has been acting highly suspicious, and if the crazy priest suddenly vanishes, it definitely means a trap has been sprung. He shows the matching crescent mark on the back of his hand, instructing Dunkel to tear the scroll immediately if anything goes wrong. With a sharp kick, Klein gallops away into the forest, leaving the captain staring after him in deep worry. In the background, Garrison sits quietly on a stone bench, watching the young master's departure with a cold, unreadable gaze. As night falls over the mountains, the wind begins to howl violently, carrying the scent of impending blood. Klein rides his horse at a steady pace along the dark, narrow mountain trail. Suddenly, he senses a sharp shift in the wind and halts his horse in a small clearing. Dalton's voice echoes from the darkness, mockingly welcoming Klein to his final resting place. Around the clearing, the bloody sliced carcasses of the hunting dogs lie scattered across the grass. Dalton sits on a rock, lazily licking his steel blade with a crazed, bloodthirsty look on his face. Sarcastic comment, licking the blade is a classic villain move, though realistically, he probably just cut his tongue. Klein dismounts, calmly asking what kind of pathetic game his cousin is trying to pull. He looks around, his highly trained senses immediately picking up multiple armed presences hiding in the surrounding trees. Dalton smirks, declaring this to be the grand and bloody finale of today's little competition. With a violent slash of his sword, Dalton screams that the final prey he's going to hunt and kill tonight is Klein. He rants that he is going to cut off Klein's head and toss it directly at Dellen's feet to prove a point. Dalton rages that the main Reinland family is nothing but a pathetic, empty shell that doesn't deserve its legendary power. With a loud snap of his fingers, Dalton boasts that Klein won't even have a single chance to struggle for his life. Dozens of cloaked, heavily armed Branch family mercenaries and archers step out from the shadows, laughing maliciously. Dalton gloats that by tomorrow everyone in the Empire will be gossiping about how the useless second son met his end. He screams that the proud sword family has fallen and that the young master died like literal dog food in the woods. Klein looks down silently, remembering Berkel's noble speech about sacrificing everything to protect the children's future. He lets out a quiet, sarcastic chuckle at the sheer irony of it all. The chuckle quickly erupts into a wild, echoing laugh that shakes the entire clearing and leaves the mercenaries completely baffled. Dalton recoils in disgust, asking if the pathetic kid has completely lost his mind from pure terror. Klein slowly lowers his hand, his laughter instantly vanishing as a chilling aura surrounds his body. A split reflection reveals his current physical form alongside the terrifying ancient shadow of the Dark Lord Archimond. Dalton's eyes widen in primal terror as an unbelievably heavy, suffocating pressure falls over the forest. Klein glares at him with a glowing red eye, asking how a pathetic branch brat dares to insult the family built at the cost of Archimond's own life. A massive, swirling vortex of glowing green dark energy erupts from his body, tearing up the grass. Dalton stumbles back, screaming in panic about how a manaless failure could possibly cast high-level magic. Klein coldly replies that this isn't magic. The swirling dark energy forms massive, crackling runes in the air, glowing with ancient authority. Klein stands in the center of the dark storm, his voice echoing like a god. It's magi. The mercenaries panic, their weapons shaking in their hands as the violent dark wind threatens to knock them over. Dalton's pupils dilate in absolute shock at the mention of the forbidden dark energy of the ancient continent. Our guy offers a slow, highly dangerous smirk, fully embracing his past identity. He begins chanting the ancient forbidden spell, calling upon the resting spirits of the dead to rise and serve him once more. Swirling rivers of glowing green energy crackle across the dark clearing. Screaming, glowing green skulls emerge from the dark void, swirling around the summoner. The chilling words of the dark incantation echo through the woods. Devour, devour, devour. Dalton lets out a terrified scream, his mind completely breaking as the ground beneath them begins to split open. A massive army of heavily armored, glowing-eyed skeletal soldiers rises from the dirt, completely surrounding the terrified mercenaries. Klein looks down at his cousins with a predatory, terrifying smile. Devour them all. He thought he had forgotten the cold, heavy weight of commanding the dead, but some things are etched too deeply into the soul to ever wash away. A close-up of a terrifying, red-lit human skull. 200 years have passed, and he is still walking the path of bone and ash. Those bloody days of war feel like a distant dream, but he is back, walking through the valley of death once more. He can still feel the cold, skeletal hands reaching out to him from the dark void, the endless voices of the deceased crying out for their master to command them, the perfect resonance, the familiar waves of dark energy. He grips the dark flow, reclaiming his absolute authority over the dead. Dalton screams that this is completely ridiculous, refusing to believe his eyes. The army of skeletons stands tall, ready to paint the forest red. Klein smirks, mockingly admitting that he was indeed once feared under the name of Archimond. The mercenaries sweat nervously, whispering if the legendary demon of the continent wasn't just a fairy tale. They look at the massive, glowing-eyed skeletons with growing dread. A skeletal soldier lets out a terrifying, bone-chilling shriek. Dalton stands frozen, his arrogance completely evaporating. Suddenly, one of the mercenary captains bursts out laughing, trying to cover up his terror. He mocks the skeletons, calling them cheap, fragile trash that he smashed by the hundreds. Dalton joins in the nervous laughter, pointing out how weird their dark bones look. The mercenaries laugh, boasting about taking their bones home as cheap souvenirs after the fight. Dalton commands his men to clear a path and slaughter the boy. The archers step forward, drawing their heavy bows. Klein calmly stands in front of his army, ordering his defensive line to prepare. A mercenary aims a massive, steel-tipped crossbow directly at Klein's head. He yells to fire. A dense black cloud of hundreds of arrows rains down from the sky. The deadly projectiles hurtle directly toward Klein, who doesn't even bother to flinch. The reflection of the incoming arrows gleams in his calm, unyielding eyes. A massive explosion of dust and steel rips through the ground where Klein was standing. Dalton laughs, gloating that the pathetic young master must have been turned into a bloody pile of meat. Suddenly, the smoke parts, revealing something that makes Dalton's eyes pop out. The elite skeletons have formed a perfect interlocking wall of glowing steel shields, effortlessly blocking every single arrow. Klein steps out from behind the wall with a cold smirk, noting how sad it is that these modern fools don't even recognize legendary legion shields. The mercenaries panic, screaming about how skeletons could suddenly summon armor and shields out of thin air. Klein tells them they made a massive mistake comparing his elite army to common, brainless monsters. He smirks warmly. My skeletons are built different. Dalton's face turns completely pale with dawning horror. Klein raises his hand, ordering his defensive line to release and prepare for the slaughter. He tells his army to crush the greedy pigs who dare to mock the land Berkel died to protect. Clenching his fist, Klein barks a single, absolute command, charge. The skeletal soldiers sprint forward, moving with a level of speed and coordination that shouldn't be physically possible for dead bones. Dalton stumbles back, his mind completely shattered by the sight. He screams in terror, unable to comprehend skeletons running like Olympic athletes. The mercenary captain desperately tries to maintain their line as the undead horde crashes into them like a freight train. With a brutal, clean slice, a skeleton's blade cuts through a mercenary, spraying black blood. A chaotic slaughter erupts as the elite skeletons effortlessly tear through the front lines. Dalton wipes the blood of his own men from his face, panicking as his forces are turned into mincemeat. Klein calmly commands his second unit of skeletal crossbowmen to surround the remaining survivors from the trees. The mercenaries look up, gasping as they see skeletal archers perched on the high branches. The skeletal marksmen draw their bows with mechanical precision. The mercenaries scream for everyone to run, realizing they are completely trapped. Klein coldly commands them to fire. A volley of heavy, steel-tipped bolts rains down from the trees. The bolts pierce through armor and bone, dropping the fleeing mercenaries like flies. Screams of agony echo through the forest as the mercenaries are pinned to the earth. A skeletal warrior stands over a fallen mercenary, delivering a finishing blow with cold efficiency. Dalton is completely trembling, realizing these aren't the weak, sluggish monsters from the stories. He screams at his remaining men to drop their bows and switch to close combat. Dalton charges forward, desperately trying to rally what's left of his terrified crew. He locks eyes with a skeleton, gritting his teeth as he swings with all his might. With a powerful swing, Dalton slices his steel blade through the skeleton's neck. The skeleton's skull pops off, bouncing onto the grass. Dalton lets out a hysterical, manic laugh, boasting that aiming for the head works just like he thought. Before he can even finish his sentence, the headless skeletal body swings its massive sword, barely missing Dalton's neck. Dalton dodges in pure panic, completely bewildered by how a headless corpse is still fighting. Klein watched with a mocking smile, reminding his dear cousin that his elite undead are in a completely different league. The headless skeleton calmly walks over and picks up its own skull from the dirt. With a sickening squelch of dark magic, the skeleton snaps its head back onto its spine, its eyes glowing bright yellow once more. Dalton stares in absolute petrified horror, realizing the monster can literally reattach its own head. Klein notes this is the exact reason why he was able to conquer the entire continent. The high-level spiritual bodies summoned with dark magi don't care about simple decapitation. The remaining mercenaries back away, their wills to fight completely broken. The elite skeletons stand in a perfect, imposing line, ready to grind them into dust. Klein sighs slightly, noting that with his current 15-year-old body, 11 elite summons is his absolute limit for now. He smiles warmly at the survivors. Shall we continue? A final, terrifying scream of a dying mercenary echoes over the quiet forest canopy. Back at the estate, the beautiful fountain flows peacefully under the cool night sky. Garrison and Aaron are sitting on the stone steps, Aaron happily munching on a cookie while Garrison tells her stories from the monastery. Aaron laughs hysterically, finding the young master's childhood antics absolutely hilarious. Garrison smiles warmly, noting how much Aaron genuinely cares about the young master. Aaron stuffs her cheeks with cookies, nodding enthusiastically. She boasts about how wonderful the young master is, while back in the forest, Dalton is screaming in absolute terror, begging for mercy. Dalton is running for his life, covered in blood and gasping for breath. Aaron's voice continues, "He is so kind," as a skeleton brutally skewers a mercenary from behind. She happily explains that Klein even shared his delicious cookies with her, calling him the warmest person in the world, contrasted with Klein standing in the forest, his face covered in fresh blood as he points coldly at Dalton. The last remaining mercenaries are ruthlessly cut down in a spray of blood. Dalton swings his sword in a desperate, panic-fueled frenzy. He manages to knock away a skeleton's blade, gasping for air as he realizes he's completely alone. Another skeleton's head tilts creepily as it prepares to attack him. Dalton grits his teeth, realizing he has to stop the summoner if he wants to survive this hell. He locks his sights on Klein, who is standing completely defenseless in the clearing. With a sudden burst of desperation, Dalton leaps forward, bypassing the skeletons. He screams Klein's name, bringing his sword down with all his remaining strength. He roars that once Klein is dead, his stupid summons will crumble into dust. Dalton swings his blade, aiming straight for Klein's neck. Klein's eyes flash with a brilliant, deep purple light. He calmly watches the incoming blade, his awakened eye breaking down the attack's trajectory in slow motion. Channeling his dark energy into his training sword, the blade crackles with raw, purple lightning. The perfect memory of Dellen's meteor sword technique flashes through his mind. Dalton's eyes widen in pure, unadulterated shock as he recognizes the stance. With a single, devastating flash, Klein unleashes the Reinland family's secret meteor sword technique, slicing Dalton's blade and chest in half. Dalton coughs up blood, staring at his broken sword in utter disbelief. Klein looks down at him with an icy, glowing purple gaze, coldly telling him that he won't be allowed a peaceful death. The judgment begins now. Some people learn too late that playing dirty games with a former Dark Lord only gets you a one-way ticket to a very customized, very painful hell. Staring down at Dalton's broken, bleeding body, Klein notes that Dalton's desperate plan to target the summoner was actually correct. That's exactly how Berkel defeated Archimond in their past life. Klein looks at his glowing blue fist, realizing that his old magi energy is beginning to perfectly bond with his new physical form. The ultimate irony is that the very power he needs to survive and protect himself is the exact hereditary ability of the Reinland family who executed him. He chuckles internally, noting that the blood of his mortal enemy has somehow made him significantly stronger. Sarcastic comment, "Talk about an awkward family tree." Dalton coughs up blood, looking up at him with an expression of pure, unadulterated confusion as he struggles to understand Klein's cryptic words. With his failing breath, the purple-haired cousin croaks out a final, weak question, demanding to know what Klein is talking about. But before he can get an answer, Dalton's eyes slowly roll back as his life force completely slips away. With a final, quiet grunt, Dalton's body goes entirely limp on the cold forest grass. Sarcastic comment, and just like that, Dalton's long career of being a minor nuisance officially comes to an end. Klein stares up at the dark sky, silently promising his ancestor Berkel that he will personally rebuild this ruined noble family with his own hands. Suddenly, Dalton snaps awake in an empty, pitch-black void, groaning in pain as his mind tries to process his surroundings. He looks around in pure panic, unable to see anything through the darkness as he feels heavy, cold metal shackles binding his limbs. Close-up of the thick iron cuffs locked tightly around his ankles, pinning him to a heavy stone floor. Dalton looks down, realizing he is strapped to a massive, spiked iron throne that looks like a literal torture device. He struggles violently against the chains as the dark, armored silhouette of a man slowly approaches him from the shadows. The figure steps into the light, revealing a cold, piercing face, as he explains that Dalton has arrived in Archimond's personal afterlife. Dalton stutters in absolute disbelief, repeating the Dark Lord's name like a mantra. Archimond calmly reminds him of his crimes, pointing out how Dalton starved and tortured helpless hunting dogs for his own sick amusement. Memories of Dalton's sadistic, laughing face during those cruel hunts play back in vivid, monochrome detail. Dalton screams at him to shut up, demanding to be released immediately. Sarcastic comment, threatening a Dark Lord in his own mind palace. Truly, Dalton's strategic genius knows no bounds. As Archimond remains dead silent, Dalton's face slowly registers a wave of dawning, terrifying understanding. He vividly remembers the exact moment Klein's sword cut through his defenses, splitting his chest open on the dark mountain trail. Dalton sweats, asking why he is perfectly fine if his body was cut down. Archimond flatly answers that he's already dead, and this is just karma returning to collect its debt. Dalton's voice cracks as he screams that this can't possibly be real. Archimond raises a hand of glowing blue spiritual flame, coldly stating that Dalton's belief doesn't change the reality of his situation. With a deep rumble, dozens of massive, glowing-eyed spectral dogs emerge from the darkness, their jaws dripping with spit. Dalton's face turns pale, his eyes widening in pure, primal terror as he realizes what is about to happen. The ghostly beasts let out a chorus of deafening, bloodthirsty roars, their jaws snapping hungrily. The entire pack of spectral dogs lunges forward, tearing into Dalton's bound body as he screams in absolute agony. Dalton tries to shrink back into the throne, completely overwhelmed by the pain of his own sins. Archimond's cold voice echoes over his screams, telling him to remember that this hell is a masterpiece of his own creation. Dalton shrieks for mercy, crying out that the pain is too much to bear. Sarcastic comment, funny how the guy who loved starving animals suddenly cares a lot about basic ethics. A single heavy tear escapes from his bloodshot eye, dropping into the dark void. Back in the real world, Dalton's dead body lies quietly on the grass, a single tear rolling down his bloody cheek. Klein stands over him in complete silence, the cold forest wind blowing past his silver hair. He lowers his training sword, his expression completely detached from the slaughter he just unleashed. Suddenly, the remaining skeletons behind him let out a low, warning shriek, sensing another presence in the woods. Klein turns his head, raising a glowing hand to dismiss his summons as a reward for their flawless service. With a gentle wave of his hand, he breaks the binding curse, letting the skeleton's physical forms dissolve into beautiful green particles. The glowing dust floats up into the dark canopy, leaving the clearing peaceful once more. Klein stands alone under the starry sky, watching the remains of his army scatter into the wind. He lowers his gaze, a quiet look of exhaustion washing over his young face. He reflects that true death is when your bones finally scatter, leaving him to deeply question why his own soul was brought back to this world. A sudden, sarcastic voice commends him for wielding such advanced necromancy, drawing Klein's attention to a cloaked figure walking out of the fog. Klein's eyes narrow as he demands to know the identity of the mysterious intruder. The masked figure tells him he doesn't need to know as a heavy, swirling mass of green dark magic flares in his hand. With a lazy wave, the necromancer shoots streams of green energy into the fresh mercenary corpses littering the grass. With a sickening squelch of dark magic, the dead mercenary's eyes snap open, glowing with a hollow, undead blue light. A close-up of a revived zombie's dead, bloodshot eye staring blankly into the night. The masked caster laughs, commanding his newly raised puppet army to charge forward and tear the young master to pieces. Klein instantly recognizes the low-level corpse revival technique, realizing this guy is a professional necromancer. The masked caster smirks, noting that while Dalton's little plan was a failure, these fresh corpse puppets are highly useful. The wind howls across the dark snowy mountain peak as the tension reaches a boiling point. Back at the estate courtyard, Erin continues to wave her arms excitedly, trying to tell Captain Dunkel more funny stories about Klein. Dunkel completely ignores her, looking deeply stressed as he stares at the crumpled parchment in his hand. He stares at the crescent star symbol on the signal magic scroll, highly suspicious of why a manaless boy would carry an emergency item. He notes that it has been over 3 hours since Klein rode into the mountains with Dalton, and his bad feeling is rapidly turning into pure panic. Dunkel prepares to mount his horse, but a pair of Branch family Conwell guards quickly step in to block his path. They smugly tell him it would be highly problematic if he abandoned his post while the hunting competition is still ongoing. Dunkel glares at them, his expression turning deathly serious as his patience completely evaporates. His eyes land on the Conwell family crest on their armor, confirming they are Dalton's personal accomplices. Dunkel cold states his title as Commander of the Reinland Knights, warning them that if they try to stop him again, he will cut them down on the spot. His eyes narrow to sharp slits, asking if they genuinely understand the weight of his warning. The Conwell guards let out a nervous gulp, completely terrified by the captain's overwhelming physical pressure. Dunkel turns to Erin, telling her he's heading into the woods to find the young master immediately. He instructs her to head back to the main mansion with Priest Garrison for safety. Erin tilts her head in confusion, casually mentioning that the priest actually left a while ago with a really serious look on his face. Dunkel sweats, instantly remembering Klein's warning that if the priest disappeared, it meant a trap was sprung and he had to tear the scroll. Without hesitation, the captain leaps onto his horse, cursing under his breath. With a violent rip, Dunkel tears the signal magic scroll directly in half. He gallops away into the forest at full speed, knowing that something catastrophic has definitely happened to the young master. Back in the dark forest clearing, the massive horde of revived zombies slowly closes in on Klein. Klein looks at them, realizing his magi is completely depleted from his previous fight. Sarcastic comment, wasting all your mana on flashy skeleton shields right before a boss fight, classic rookie mistake. The zombies let out low, guttural growls as they step forward. The masked caster points a lazy finger toward Klein, commanding his puppets to move in for the kill. The entire undead horde charges, their rusty blades raised as Klein stands his ground. Klein clenches his fist, noting that this low-level necromancer has a lot of nerve trying to overwhelm him with his own favorite magic. Suddenly, the crescent crest on the back of his hand begins to glow with a brilliant, intense pink light as Dunkel triggers the scroll. A zombie lunges through the air, its jaw open as it prepares to strike our protagonist. The rest of the horde screeches, completely blocking off any path of escape. Klein smirks, whispering to the air that they are completely finished now. The masked necromancer blinks, uttering a confused "what?" as he notices the boy's calm expression. Right then, a massive, blinding beam of golden holy energy crashes down from the heavens like a lightning strike. Priest Garrison drops directly from the sky, his giant fist slamming a zombie into the solid earth with a thunderous explosion. Garrison stands in the crater, his eyes glowing with an intense yellow light as he holds up his massive golden holy book. Unleashing a massive wave of sacred light, the priest commands the dead to rest, completely vaporizing the surrounding zombies in a single blast. Garrison turns his back to the dust, calmly telling the young master that he can rest easy now. The masked necromancer is completely frozen in shock, stuttering to know who this monster is. The wind whips through Garrison's silver-streaked hair, his face looking incredibly intimidating. With a confident, scarred smile, the priest declares his true title, a proxy of the Holy Order, officially stepping onto the battlefield. In the eyes of the public, the Holy Order represents pure, unchallenged divinity, but behind closed doors, they maintain an elite unit of absolute killers. The proxies. 3 human weapons who carry out the Pope's personal orders with absolute, unquestioning obedience. As the Church's strongest assets, they are the only ones capable of wielding the sacred relics left behind by St. Gall, possessing the raw power of an entire fortress. The masked necromancer grunts in pain, desperately trying to swing his blade at the giant holy man. With a single, effortless backhand swing of his heavy golden book, Garrison sends the assassin flying across the clearing like a toy. The necromancer's mask cracks, her eyes wide with pure panic as she realizes the gap in their power. Klein watches from the shadows, fully aware that among the 3 proxies, Garrison is the one who boasts the absolute greatest raw strength. Garrison looks back at him, offering a comforting smile as he reminds the young master that he promised to protect him. Low growls echo as the remaining zombies scramble to their feet, their eyes glowing with hollow blue light. They let out a collective screech, charging toward the priest with zero self-preservation. A zombie lunges with its jaw open, completely covered in dried blood and dirt. Garrison doesn't even bother to dodge, slamming his heavy golden relic directly into the zombie's face with a blinding yellow flash. He swings his giant book in a wide, sweeping arc, completely vaporizing several undead in a single second. He coldly commands the sinners to ask for forgiveness as he continues his relentless assault. With a brutal swing, he offers them a literal baptism of fire, leaving headless zombie corpses dropping onto the grass. Sarcastic comment, when a priest offers a baptism, usually it doesn't involve your head exploding, but Garrison is unconventional. The remaining group of zombies let out a final desperate screech as they charged through the smoke. Garrison steps forward, his heavy leather boot cracking the solid earth beneath him. He launches a rapid-fire barrage of heavy strikes, completely crushing the skulls of every zombie in his path. This is mercy, and this is judgment. Sarcastic comment: honestly, getting your skull caved in by a giant Bible is one hell of a way to meet God. The masked necromancer watches from behind a tree, trembling in fear as she realizes her entire undead unit has been turned to ash. Garrison slowly walks through the field of dust toward her, his shadow looming large. The assassin panics, cursing under her breath that this insane church monster was definitely not part of Dalton's deal. She turns on her heel and runs, her boots kicking up dirt as she tries to escape into the dark forest. In her frantic hurry, her mask slips off, clattering loudly against the stone path. Suddenly, Garrison's massive, scarred hand clamps down on her head from behind like a vice. "Where do you think you're going?" The necromancer lets out a high-pitched, terrified scream as the priest's fingers dig deeply into her skull. Garrison coldly whispers that his prayer is not yet finished, telling the sinner to be grateful for this divine judgment. Tears of pure agony stream down her face as she struggles against his crushing, steel-like grip. With a sickening crunch of holy energy, Garrison delivers the final, brutal execution. Klein stands a few feet away, quietly watching the bloody display with a completely blank expression. A bloody eyeball rolls onto the grass, a grim reminder of the absolute lethality of the church's elite proxy. Garrison turns to him, his voice returning to its usual cheerful tone as he calls out young Master Klein. Klein reflects on Garrison's terrifying, godlike power. The priest merely took a single step, yet his sheer presence turned the forest into a graveyard. The raw, suffocating pressure of his holy aura is unlike anything Klein has ever experienced in this era. Over 20 mercenary bodies were shredded into tiny pieces on the spot. Garrison holds out his blood-stained hand, a faint, unsettling smile on his face. He explains that he sensed a heavy trace of forbidden necromancy in the woods and rushed over to investigate immediately. Blood drips from Klein's forehead as he stands there, completely exhausted from the magical strain. Garrison looks closely at him, noting that the dark, ominous energy he felt earlier didn't seem to belong to the masked assassin. He places his massive, bloody hand gently on Klein's shoulder, his gaze turning incredibly sharp. He quietly notes that the forbidden power felt far too ancient and powerful to belong to a low-level necromancer. Klein maintains a perfectly deadpan expression, fully aware that this terrifying priest is ready to kill him right here if he shows a single hint of suspicion. The heavy silence is interrupted by a distant shout echoing through the dark trees. Captain Dunkel finally arrives, galloping into the clearing with a look of pure panic on his face. He leaps off his horse, frantically asking if the young master is all right as his eyes scan the bloody scene. Klein looks at him, a thin trail of blood dripping from his lip as his body finally reaches its absolute physical limit. With a heavy thump, Klein's legs give out completely, and he begins to collapse onto the grass. Dunkel rushes forward, screaming the young master's name as he tries to catch him. He grabs Klein, frantically asking what happened and why there is so much blood on his clothes. Klein weakly tells him to stop shouting, asking if he found any trace of Dalton. Klein deadpans, "I killed him, because he tried to kill me first." Cut to the majestic marble-pillared courtroom of the Empire, bathed in bright, clear sunlight. A fist slams violently onto a heavy wooden desk with a loud bang. Count Delkin Conwell, Dalton's furious father, roars in disbelief at the accusation that his son tried to assassinate the second master. He yells to the entire assembly of nobles that his son was a knight of honor, claiming the main Reinland family is framing a dead man to cover up a murder. He demands they find the real culprit immediately, pointing an angry finger as Heinkel walks into the room. Heinkel, Klein's father, steps forward holding a document. He notes that despite hours of intense interrogation, Klein's statement hasn't changed a single detail. He holds up a paper showing the Conwell family crest, adding that there is official record of 20 Conwell mercenaries being dispatched at the exact time Dalton went missing. Delkin sweats profusely, swearing under his breath at his late son's incompetence for leaving a paper trail. He desperately argues that it still makes no sense since Dalton was an elite knight while Klein has never even held a sword. The surrounding nobles whisper in agreement, pointing out that Heinkel himself previously stated Klein lacks even a single drop of mana. Delkin realizes that if the court discovers Dalton tried to assassinate a direct descendant, his entire branch house is finished. He decides to change tactics, trying to discredit Klein's character. He rants that Klein was born to a duchess surrounded by bizarre rumors and has claimed to be the Dark Lord Archimond since he was a toddler. Delkin yells, asking how they can take the word of a mentally unstable, cursed boy. Heinkel tells him to watch his tongue. Delkin screams that Klein clearly hired an outside assassin to murder his son and is now pinning the blame on Dalton. A cold, familiar voice suddenly cuts through his rant, telling him that's quite enough. Klein steps into the courtroom, looking sharp in his dark suit as he tells the count he's been spouting absolute nonsense. He calmly explains that Dalton hired mercenaries to kill him, so he acted in self-defense, and Priest Garrison stepped in when a mysterious necromancer tried to turn the bodies into zombies. Delkin screams that it's a massive lie, but Klein merely smirks. His left eye flashes with a brief, mocking pink spark as he asks if the count thinks the part about him being Archimond is a lie too. Delkin recoils, completely speechless and trembling under the boy's gaze. Klein promises himself that he will rebuild this family with his own hands, and he won't let any branch family pests defile it. A sudden, loud knock on the courtroom doors interrupts the tension. A stunning blonde woman walks in, apologizing for her late arrival. The herald announces her, Laya, commander of the prestigious Blue Holy Spear Knights. Klein remembers seeing her at the swordsmanship demo, wondering why she's suddenly showing up here. One of the judges asks Heinkel why the Fallweavern family is involved in a Reinland matter. Heinkel explains that Dalton previously served on missions under her knight order, therefore she has every right to attend the inquiry. Laya looks directly at Klein, her sharp golden eyes scanning him up and down. She walks past the benches, raising a hand with polished red nails to signal the judges. She politely requests to speak with young Master Klein in private. Heinkel is surprised, asking why him before ultimately allowing it. He tells Klein to go ahead, but not to take too long. Klein walks out beside her, highly annoyed by how dramatic knights always have to be. But as they walk down the quiet corridor, he realizes this is actually a perfect opportunity. He analyzes that there are only 3 reasons she'd want to talk: verification, suspicion, or a test. Regardless of her motives, he has no intention of running, determined to use her influence to his advantage. They enter a private sunlit waiting room and the heavy wooden door clicks shut behind them. Laya's high-heeled boot steps firmly onto the marble tiles. She closes the distance, her breathing catching as she stares at his face. She looks down at his chest, her eyes widening with a bizarre, intense curiosity. Suddenly, she pins Klein against the wall, leaning in incredibly close as she asks, "Can I touch you?" Staring at her beautiful face in absolute jaw-dropping shock, Klein's mind goes completely blank as he wonders if this woman has completely lost her mind. Meet Laya Ren Fallweavern. She's the eldest daughter of one of the continent's most powerful duchies, and she's already the commander of an elite knight order, basically making her the definition of an overachiever. Her official service record is essentially a horror movie trailer for any monster unlucky enough to cross her path, starting with a massive horde of high-ranking beasts. When a group of massive dual-axe-wielding monsters tried to ambush her from behind, her eyes didn't even widen, she just calmly prepped her spear. In a single blinding flash of blue light, she cut through their front line before they could even finish their battle cry. This supposedly highly dangerous monster suppression operation in the Western Forest quickly turned into a one-sided cleanup duty. She spun her spear with such ridiculous speed that high-ranking monsters were losing their limbs before they even realized she had stepped into range. When the dust settled, she was standing casually on a mound of defeated beasts, looking like she just finished a light morning jog. She did all of this entirely by herself, proving that when it comes to raw martial talent, she's in a completely different league. Back in the present, Laya turns around with a sharp glare, telling our boy Klein to stop lagging behind and hurry up. As Klein jogs to catch up, she flatly warns him not to act too friendly, reminding him that they aren't even biologically related. Klein recalls his father Heinkel explaining the family tree. Technically, his aunt is the second wife of Duke Fallweavern, which makes Laya his cousin, but since she's the daughter of the first wife, they don't actually share a single drop of blood, meaning they are complete strangers. Suddenly, Laya stops dead in her tracks, stating that everything she is about to do next is purely out of her own personal curiosity. Before Klein can even process what that means, she shoves him straight back against the balcony, railing with some serious physical force. Leaning in so close he can probably count her eyelashes, she asks him if she can touch him, leaving our former Dark Lord completely short-circuited. From the outside, it looks like a highly dramatic romance scene, while Klein is internally screaming, trying to figure out why this girl has zero concept of personal boundary space. Without waiting for a yes, she aggressively reaches out and grabs his wrist in a vice grip. She feels his hand, noting that it's incredibly soft and smooth, completely lacking any of the scars, burns, or blisters you'd expect from a trained noble. Klein is panicking internally, wondering why this scary blonde is feeling up his fingers, while she explains that even the most elite swordsmen have hardened skin in specific areas. She squeezes his palm, pointing out that the tendons under the index finger and the thumb never lie when it comes to sword practice. She gets right back in his face, delivering the ultimate accusation: he has clearly never wielded a sword in his entire life. She points out the obvious plot hole: how did a kid with baby-smooth hands defeat an official knight like Dalton and 20 armed mercenaries? Her mind immediately flashes to a dark, forbidden image, wondering if he used some sort of unholy, demonic power to survive. Realizing he's in deep trouble, Klein quickly slaps her hand away to create some distance. Instead of stuttering, he puts on his best smug smirk, mockingly asking if she's going to accuse him of being the legendary Dark Lord Archimond next. Internally, Klein's survival instincts are screaming that this girl is highly dangerous and that her curiosity might get him executed. He analyzes her intense gaze, realizing she isn't just asking a question, she is actively studying his micro-expressions to see if he flinches. He knows that if he stays silent, it's an admission of guilt, and if he hesitates, she'll take it as confirmation, meaning his only choice is to bluff. Deciding to match her energy, he leans in with a confident grin and asks her, "Yeah, what if I actually am?" He's ready to deliver a grand, mysterious speech, but before he can even finish saying Archimond, she completely ruins the vibe by laughing in his face. She mocks the entire concept, finding it absolutely hilarious that a tiny, weak-looking kid like him could ever be the terrifying Continental Devil. Klein stands there, completely frozen, as his brain tries to process the fact that his grand bluff was defeated by a single laugh. His eyes widen in pure, unadulterated shock as his pride as an ancient Dark Lord takes a massive, critical hit. Trembling with offense, he asks if she really had to use the word brat, but she just smirks, offering to repeat it if he didn't hear her the first time. She goes on a full-blown roasting spree, telling him he's way too small, his bodily proportions are terrible, his voice has zero weight, and he has absolutely no presence. She finishes him off with a verbal spear to the heart, calling him nothing more than a little, harmless kid. Klein's soul practically leaves his body from the severe emotional damage, while she concludes that since he clearly isn't Archimond, his victory over Dalton must have been a fluke. She looks back over her shoulder with a playful gaze, promising that if a weakling like him actually defeated a knight fairly, she'd give him her lips. Klein just stares at her, his mind completely blank as he tries to compute why she would even make a bet like that. His deadpan eyes say it all. The ancient Dark Lord has been temporarily rendered brain-dead by a teenage girl's logic. While Klein is trying to figure out if this is some advanced political move, Laya casually walks away, reminding him they're going to be late. She looks out at the sunset, her expression turning surprisingly serious for a brief second. She tells herself that there is absolutely no way the legendary Archimond would ever be as small and unimposing as Klein. The heavy wooden doors of the courtroom swing open as the guards loudly announce the arrival of Klein and Lady Leia. Walking into the massive courtroom, Klein accepts his reality. He is officially seen as the useless second son who was locked up in a monastery for 7 years. He knows that without hard proof, nobody in this high society is going to believe that he killed Dalton in pure self-defense, especially with Dalton's father glaring at him. Duke Heinkel looks down from his seat, calmly asking what the two of them were discussing outside for so long. Instead of answering, Klein suddenly reaches out and grabs the hilt of his escort knight's sword, surprising everyone in the room. With a loud, echoing slam, Klein draws the blade and drives it straight into the courtroom floor, shattering the wood. The entire room goes dead silent as Heinkel and Laya stare at him, absolutely shocked by this insane display of disrespect. Pointing the sharp blade directly at Dalton's father, Klein coldly addresses Delkin Conwell. He declares that he's tired of the endless political debates and suggests they settle this matter the traditional Northern way. With a chilling glare, Klein challenges the corrupt count to a traditional trial by combat to decide the truth once and for all. The entire courtroom erupts in murmurs as Delcon sweats, completely taken aback by this crazy teenager demanding a duel to the death. For context, trial by combat is an ancient, brutal northern law used only when a legal trial reaches a complete stalemate. There are 0 rules, any weapon is allowed, and whoever survives the fight is legally declared the winner of the entire case. Simply put, it's a legal way to beat your opponent to death and have the government agree that you were right all along. Delkin tries to act confused, stammering that this is far too sudden, but Klein calmly tells him that they both know exactly why this needs to happen. Klein points out that despite clear evidence of Dalton's assassination plot, Delkin still tried to frame him and insulted both him and his late mother. Klein's thoughts are cold. While he has to pretend to care about his current mother to play the part of Klein, his true soul still belongs to Archimond. He has absolutely no real emotional connection to his second mother, but he's more than happy to use her name as a perfect excuse to start a fight. He demands that the Count make a decision immediately instead of wasting everyone's valuable time. The nobles in the stands begin whispering in excitement, thrilled by the sudden return of a violent, ancient tradition they haven't seen in years. Duke Heinkel steps in, declaring that as the 7th Duke of Reinland, he cannot ignore an ancient tradition, officially guaranteeing that the duel's outcome will decide the legal verdict. Heinkel rips up the previous documents, rendering all court evidence completely void, which makes Delkin realize he just got a massive get-out-of-jail-free card. Delkin smugly asks if Klein will be fine, mockingly pointing out that everyone knows the young master has absolutely no mana. With a cruel, wicked grin, the Count reveals he plans to send an elite knight to fight in his place, internally promising to have this annoying brat slaughtered. Klein doesn't even blink, calmly telling the Count that it doesn't matter who he sends, because they'll just end up joined with Dalton in hell. Delkin greedily accepts, scheduling the duel in 4 days, while Klein tells himself that this fight is just the first step of his master plan. He plans to use the Conwell family as a literal stepping stone to show all the corrupt branch relatives exactly who they are dealing with. He's going to use this opportunity to completely rewrite his reputation and overhaul the power structure of the Reinland family, starting at the Grand Estate. Back at the mansion, a loud panicked shout echoes through the hallways under the grand chandelier. Delin is absolutely losing his mind, towering over Klein and asking him if he's completely lost his sanity by demanding a trial by combat. Delin screams that he could literally die, but Klein just casually rubs his head, complaining that he's already explained his plan a dozen times. Klein tells him that since their father already gave his official blessing, there's no point in arguing, leaving Delin completely stunned. Desperate to protect his brother, Delin offers to step in as his designated champion, but Klein immediately shuts him down with a flat refusal. Klein points out the reality. The only reason their house rules the north is because Heinkel is the strongest, and Delin is the direct successor. If Delin fights, it gives the branch families a legal excuse to assassinate the heir. Realizing his brother is right, Delin stands in silence, unable to find a logical argument to counter the Dark Lord's strategy. Klein looks at him, understanding how frustrating it must be for the perfect heir to be sidelined, but this risky move is absolutely vital for Klein to shed his useless label. He tells Delin that he has absolutely no intention of letting him take this fight, prompting Delin to remember the day his little brother was born. In a flashback, a young Delin remembers running to the crib, filled with absolute joy at finally having a baby brother. He remembers looking down at the tiny baby reaching up, expecting to see a normal, cute newborn. To young Delin, the baby looked like a pure, flawless angel, though in reality, infant Archimond was actively trying to cast a high-level dark summoning spell. Back in the present, Delin tearfully explains that after waiting 7 long years to get his brother back from the monastery, he can't bear the thought of losing him to a duel. Suddenly, Delin grabs Klein's shoulders, his grip so tight and desperate that it catches Klein completely off guard. As a tear rolls down Delin's face, he begs Klein to listen to him very carefully. Klein is extremely confused and deeply uncomfortable, wondering why his half-brother is crying over a simple, calculated duel. Before Delin can finish his speech, a servant suddenly opens the doors, announcing that Count Conwell has officially chosen his champion. The servant looks incredibly tense, sweat dripping down his face as he prepares to deliver the name. Klein calmly asks who it is, and the servant reveals the name is Randel, an infamous excommunicated imperial knight known for his extreme violence. The scene cuts to a dark, messy tavern as the wooden doors swing open with an ominous creak. A dusty lion headmount hangs on the wall, setting a grim, wild tone for the champion's introduction. A bottle of cheap, dark red alcohol is poured heavily into a rugged wooden mug. The entire tavern floor is covered in blood and unconscious bodies, with a massive muscular giant sitting in the center of the carnage. The reason for his banishment was pure, uncontrollable bloodlust. Under the roaring lion mount, the giant Randel guzzles down the liquor, looking like an absolute monster of a man. Randel lets out a sinister laugh, excited by the prospect of breaking the young master of Reinland and hearing him scream. Back at the estate, Klein's expression remains completely blank, wholly unfazed by the threat of a giant brute. The day of the duel arrives, and Dunkel hands over a wrapped sword, stating that he managed to craft it exactly to Klein's highly specific instructions. Dunkel warns him to be extremely careful, looking down at the small young master with genuine concern. He explains the sword's massive flaw because of how it was built. The moment it clashes with any mana-infused blade, it will instantly shatter into pieces. Klein draws the blade slightly, his eyes narrowing as he quietly notes that the weak sword is absolutely perfect for his plan. Stepping out into the bright morning sun, Klein prepares to head straight to the public arena. The grand arena is packed to the brim with thousands of excited citizens, all whispering in disbelief as the supposedly talentless Lord Klein actually steps onto the field. In the royal box, Delkin sits comfortably next to Heinkel, laughing loudly at Klein's foolishness for showing up in person. The Count mockingly asks Heinkel if he's really okay with this, pointing out that his champion is a seasoned Imperial Knight who might easily tear a manaless kid apart. Delkin sneers, suggesting it's still not too late to swap Klein out for his talented older brother Dellen, but Heinkel remains completely silent. Down on the sandy field, Klein stands calmly, looking around the empty arena and wondering where his giant opponent is hiding. He tells himself that his opponent is running late, but before he can even finish his thought, a massive shadow looms over him. A colossal hand suddenly reaches down from the sky, threatening to crush Klein into the dirt. With a loud, ground-shaking thud, the giant champion Randel lands heavily on the sand, kicking up a massive cloud of dust. Standing at over 8 feet tall, Randel grins down at the silver-haired boy, asking if he is indeed the famous Lord Klein. Randel mocks his small size, noting that the young master looks incredibly fragile and much younger than the rumors suggested. Reaching out a massive, scarred hand, Randel taunts him, wondering what kind of satisfying sound Klein's thin neck will make when he snaps it. Before Randel's hand can even touch him, Klein executes a perfect, high-speed backward leap, dodging the grab effortlessly. The crowd is stunned by his speed, murmuring in confusion as they try to figure out how a kid with no mana just moved that fast. Delkin laughs, pointing out Klein's retreat to Heinkel and claiming the boy is already running away in absolute terror before the fight even starts. Randel chuckles, mocking Klein for looking so completely petrified of his massive size. In reality, Klein is just sweating from a completely different reason, cursing under his breath because the sudden grab genuinely startled him. He realizes Randel's massive hand triggered his trauma, reminding him of how Priest Garrison used to aggressively grab him during his agonizing purification training. Klein internally curses the eccentric priest, calling him a completely useless bastard whose only talent was water torture. Up in the stands, a sharp pair of golden eyes is watching the arena very closely. Laya rests her chin on her hand, looking mildly bored, but secretly highly analytical of Klein's physical movements. Her knight warns her that her mother will be furious if she stays, but Laya flatly states she doesn't care about her stepmother anyway. She stares intensely at Klein, her mind flashing back to her promise about giving him her lips if he somehow wins this impossible fight. Down on the sand, Klein turns his back to the giant, completely ignoring the massive threat behind him. Feeling incredibly embarrassed by his panic jump, he clears his throat and awkwardly makes up an excuse about having a stiff neck. Annoyed by his casual attitude, Randel sneaks up and lands a heavy, solid grab on Klein's shoulder from behind. Klein's face darkens with pure, unadulterated annoyance as he asks the giant if his ears are stuffed with muscles, reminding him that he hates being touched. Klein delivers a cold verbal jab, stating that this obnoxious lack of boundary control is exactly why the Empire kicked him out. Randel's face contorts with absolute rage, his veins bulging as he promises to make Klein scream for that insult. With a roar, Randel swings a colossal fist down to turn the boy into a flat pancake. In a split second of calm, Klein's hand reaches up and quickly unbuttons his formal suit jacket. Randel's fist slams into the ground with explosive power, completely shattering the stone tiles and throwing rubble everywhere. A massive shockwave ripples through the arena, leaving a smoking crater in the middle of the field. Randel looks down into the dust, his angry expression turning into confusion as he realizes something is off. He lifts his hand, only to find he's holding nothing but a completely empty, torn suit jacket. The spectators gasp in disbelief, wondering how a manaless kid could survive an impact that literally shattered solid stone. The crowd frantically looks around, yelling that the young master has completely vanished from the crater. A light, quiet footstep lands softly on the sand just outside the dust cloud. Standing calmly in his red vest and white shirt, Klein stands unscathed, holding his cheap sword. Taking a slow breath, Klein tells himself that the giant's massive physical strength makes a direct head-on clash completely out of the question. He knows that a single direct hit from Randel would literally shatter his bones, meaning he has to treat this fight with absolute seriousness. Up in the stands, Dellen is sweating profusely, pointing out that even a tiny graze from that giant could be fatal for his brother. Dellen looks down with dread, feeling like Klein is practically walking straight to his execution. He remembers Klein's firm words about protecting the family's heir, realizing his brother took this dangerous fight solely to shield the Reinland future. Suddenly, Randel charges out of the smoke, swinging his massive heavy scimitar in a furious arc. The giant blade cuts through the air with a terrifying wind sound, aiming to slice Klein in half. Klein's eyes flare with a brilliant purple light as he activates his replication eye, analyzing the exact trajectory of the attack. Randel's eyes widen in shock as he realizes the boy is moving with supernatural precision. Klein slides under the massive swing like a ghost, his blade flashing in a beautiful glowing pink arc. His sword drags along the floor, making a sharp screeching sound as sparks fly off the stone. A massive wave of bright sparks and dust erupts from the ground, temporarily blinding the giant. Randel recovers instantly, throwing a colossal mana-infused punch straight at Klein's face. Klein raises his sword to block, resulting in a massive, blinding explosion of golden sparks that forces him backward. Randel sneers, mockingly asking if Klein really thinks he can win a duel to the death by doing nothing but running away. The giant gets close, viciously whispering for Klein to stop holding back and use his infamous forbidden necromancy. Randel smugly addresses him as the Great Archimond, but his smile immediately fades when he sees Klein's chilling, dark smile. Klein's inner mind is flooded with a terrifying blood-red aura as he seriously considers just summoning his skeletons and slaughtering everyone in the arena. Randel is hit by an absolute wave of pure, crushing death energy, his body freezing in instinctual terror. Overwhelmed by the sudden pressure, the giant jumps backward to create as much distance as humanly possible. The spectators are completely baffled, whispering that Randel must be going easy on the kid, while Randel himself is sweating in absolute fear. Panting heavily, Randel tries to understand what just happened, terrified by the invisible, cold aura that nearly choked him. Behind Klein, a massive, terrifying spectral image of a Grim Reaper rises in purple smoke, radiating an overwhelming pressure that suffocates the entire field. Delkan is losing his mind, screaming to know why his champion is acting so terrified of a manaless boy. Duke Heinkel's sharp blue eye narrows, sensing that something incredibly ancient and dangerous is happening on the field. Klein lowers his sword, pointing it at the giant and calmly promising that he has absolutely no intention of using necromancy. With a proud, smug smirk, he states that since he carries the Reinland name, he will prove his superiority using nothing but pure, honest swordsmanship. He repeats his promise, leaving both Heinkel and Dellen looking up in absolute awe at his sudden display of family pride. The entire stadium erupts into massive cheers, thousands of people screaming Klein's name in pure excitement. Delkin tries to laugh it off, claiming this is exactly how a real trial should be, but his voice is shaking with nervous sweat. The crowd yells that Klein's confidence wasn't a bluff, while Randel stands in silence, his pride as an imperial knight deeply wounded. Randel convinces himself that the terrifying aura was just a mind trick, telling himself that his physical strength and stamina are still vastly superior. He channels a massive swirling crimson mana around his body, preparing to unleash the absolute peak of imperial swordsmanship. Pushing his muscles, breathing, and blood flow to their absolute physical limits, Randel's body bulges with terrifying power. He leaps high into the air, aiming to end the entire duel with a single explosive crimson strike. Screaming a death threat, Randel descends like a meteor, putting every ounce of his mana into the attack. Klein stands perfectly still, calmly holding his sword ready as the massive red blade rushes toward his head. Klein's purple Eye of Replication crackles with power, completely analyzing Randel's technique, speed, and mana flow in real time. Randel unleashes a flurry of massive crimson slashes, aiming to shred the boy into pieces. In Klein's vision, every single blade trajectory is mapped out in glowing red lines, allowing him to dodge every strike like a ghost walking through walls. Randel is losing his mind, screaming in frustration as he misses every single attack against a target that refuses to be hit. With a final, desperate cry, Randel swings his blade down with everything he has left. A massive explosion of red energy and dust completely consumes the arena, blinding the entire audience. A thick, heavy cloud of gray smoke fills the center of the arena, hiding the outcome of the final strike. Randel stands victorious in the dust, but his expression immediately turns to pure, freezing horror. He realizes the boy has vanished again, sweating as he wonders if Klein actually predicted and read every single one of his sword paths. Suddenly, Klein appears directly above Randel's head, descending from the smoke with his sword raised. Klein smirks, noting that for all of Randel's massive size, his back was left completely wide open and undefended. Unleashing a massive purple-infused vertical slash, Klein perfectly executes the Reinland family's ultimate technique, the Meteor Sword. Blood sprays across the sand as Dellen and Heinkel watch in absolute jaw-dropping shock, instantly recognizing their family's secret art. Randel lets out a painful, agonized scream, his mind completely broken by the fact that a manaless boy just sliced him down. Standing over his defeated opponent, Klein looks down with a victorious, cold purple gaze and a highly satisfied smirk. Up on the balcony, Leia's knight is completely speechless, trying to understand how a kid with 0 mana could ever pull off the Meteor Sword. He turns to ask his captain, only to find Leia standing there with a massive, bright red blush on her face, completely mesmerized and wide-eyed by Klein's absolute dominance. The sky over the Reinland estate is clear, but inside the Duke's office, the tension is thick enough to cut with a butter knife. Behind closed doors, our bodyguard Dunkel is having a serious chat with Duke Heinkel, who is currently undergoing a massive crisis of conscience. Heinkel admits that under normal circumstances, he should have put a stop to this absolute madness himself. Dunkel stands there looking incredibly stressed, asking the Duke the golden question: if he knew Klein had a 0% chance of winning against a literal Imperial Knight, why on earth did he approve the duel? Heinkel looks down, admitting that his hands were tied because Klein stepped up to defend his late mother's honor, a woman Heinkel himself failed to protect when the church locked Klein away. Clenching his fists in a silent wave of guilt, the Duke laments that in the grand scheme of things, he's basically failed to protect his own bloodline. But Dunkel just stands tall, flashing a confident look and telling his boss that he can officially stop worrying about the kid. He looks Heinkel dead in the eye, dropping some serious truth about the young master's character. Because the reality is, our boy Klein is a tactical genius who simply does not pick fights he isn't 100% guaranteed to win. Back in the arena, Heinkel's jaw practically hits the floor as he watches his apparently weak son execute a perfect vertical slash. To understand how this is physically possible, we have to look at the unique mechanics of the Reinland family's northern swordsmanship. Most standard styles, like the Imperial swordsmanship Randel uses, are based on pure predation, relying on overwhelming the enemy by dumping all your mana at once like a hungry lion. It's loud, it's flashy, and it's completely useless if you run out of juice halfway through a fight. Meanwhile, the creatures of the frozen north don't have the luxury of wasting energy on flashy moves. If you waste your energy in the freezing cold, you don't get a cool victory screen, you just freeze to death before lunch. So, the Reinland style is built entirely on the concept of absolute temperance. It's like an eagle circling high in the sky, waiting for the exact millisecond its prey lets its guard down before striking with minimal effort. In short, it's the ultimate martial art designed to squeeze maximum lethality out of a single drop of energy. Klein smirks as he completes his move, noting that this extreme efficiency is the exact reason he can copy and use his family's moves without possessing a single ounce of traditional mana. Randel's face contorts in absolute fury as he realizes he's currently being outplayed by a teenager who isn't even sweating. Gritting his teeth like a rabid animal, the giant calls Klein a little rat and decides it's time to stop holding back. He unleashes a massive crimson wave of pressure that shakes the entire arena floor. His muscles swell to double their size as his eyes glow with a dangerous blood-red light. Up in the VIP stands, the corrupt Count Delkin instantly recognizes the move, celebrating that his expensive champion is finally using his secret technique. It's a massive mana burst designed to physically paralyze the opponent's nervous system, locking them in place for an easy execution. Klein stands perfectly still as the giant pressure wave washes over him, his expression completely unreadable. Screaming that he is the only one who will leave this arena alive, Randel leaps into the air for a final crushing blow. Up in the stands, Delin is losing his mind, screaming for his little brother to get out of the way. Randel brings his massive red-hot sword down with enough force to split a mountain. Klein raises his cheap standard sword to block, resulting in a deafening metallic clash that throws sparks across the sand. But right on cue, Dunkel's warning flashes through the air. The cheap metal is structurally incapable of holding up against that much mana. With a loud, clean crack, Klein's blade shatters into a dozen pieces. Randel lets out a triumphant, ugly laugh, thinking he's officially won the duel, but Klein just smirks right through the debris, calmly noting that his plan is now finally complete. To understand what happens next, think of a proud lion that easily hunts down large beasts but is completely defenseless against a single floating feather. The lion tries to swipe at the feather, but its massive claws are useless against something so small and light. The feather simply drifts into the lion's blind spots, irritating its eyes and ears. And while the lion is busy trying to blink the dust away, its throat is left completely wide open. Because Klein's sword shattered, the tiny, razor-sharp shards of steel are now floating directly in Randel's face, forcing the giant to blink for a fraction of a second. In that exact window of distraction, Klein zips forward with his broken hilt, executing a lightning-fast slash that cleanly cuts through Randel's arm. The giant's massive weapon clatters heavily onto the sand, instantly ended by a single brilliant move. Duke Heinkel stands up, his voice echoing through the silence as he officially declares the duel over. The arena crowd is dead silent, their brains collectively short-circuiting as they try to process the absolute miracle they just witnessed. Even Dunkel is sweating in disbelief, analyzing how a kid flawlessly copied a high-level knight's footwork and blade trajectory with 0 mana. He realizes Klein didn't just win, he intentionally baited his own sword into breaking so he could deliver a lethal point-blank strike. It is, without a doubt, a perfect flawless victory for the young master. The giant Randel rolls on the floor, clutching his severed limb and screaming in absolute agony. Medical mages rush onto the field, frantically calling for spells to stop the heavy bleeding before the knight passes out. While the mages are panic casting green healing magic, Klein just stands over them, looking mildly curious. Scratching his chin, he casually asks the doctors if they can actually reattach a hand like that in this day and age. The doctors tell him that standard magic can easily fix it with a basic prosthetic, leaving Klein slightly unimpressed. He sighs internally, disappointed that even after 200 years, medical magic has barely made any progress. But Heinkel walks up behind him, staring intensely and asking his son how he can look at a severed limb with absolutely zero emotion. Klein's sweat glands immediately activate as he realizes he forgot to play the role of an innocent, traumatized 15-year-old. He frantically wonders if he should start crying or pretend to throw up to keep his disguise intact, but before he can act, a loud scream cuts through the air. Count Delkin is throwing a massive temper tantrum in the stands, screaming that there's no way his expensive Imperial champion could lose to a kid. Heinkel stands tall, demanding that the Count honor their legal agreement, admit his crimes, and accept the winner's demands. But the corrupt Count refuses, screaming that he's lost his son, his money, and his personal knight, making it impossible for him to back down. Before the Count can finish his sentence, Klein suddenly steps forward, his hand moving like a blur. His eye flashes with a terrifying cold purple light as he locks his gaze onto the screaming politician. In a low, chilling whisper that echoes directly in the Count's ears, Klein calls out his full name. Delkin suddenly freezes, his entire body stiffening as a massive wave of black, suffocating energy wraps around his neck. His eyes widen in primal terror as his brain tries to understand why he suddenly can't breathe. Clutching his throat, the Count falls to his knees, while Klein's voice echoes in his mind like a physical weight. Klein commands him to confess his sins before the entire North and beg the Duke for mercy. Behind Klein, a massive swirling purple skull appears, whispering unholy chants directly into the Count's soul. The unholy pressure is so intense that the Count is legally declared mentally broken within seconds. A massive spectral Grim Reaper rises behind our boy, casting a literal shadow of death over the kneeling politician. Delcon's face turns pale blue, tears and sweat pouring down his face as he completely loses his sanity. Sobbing hysterically, the proud Count slams his head into the dirt, weeping that he was completely wrong. Klein watches with cold, dead eyes. For context, he's using a forbidden high-level necromancy skill called Dead Man's Voice. It's a terrifying spell designed to disrupt the target's soul, inducing such extreme terror that their mind completely collapses. Having that chanted directly into his brain, it's a miracle the Count's head didn't literally explode. He weeps, begging for forgiveness for insulting Klein's late mother. The nobles in the stands are sweating in absolute shock, horrified to see one of the branch family's strongest leaders crumble like a toddler. Looking down at his broken enemy, Klein knows that this is the perfect start to his family cleanup. He raises his broken sword hilt high into the air, calling for the entire arena's attention. He loudly declares himself the sole challenger and the rightful victor of this trial by combat. Delin watches from the stands, his eyes wide as his little brother officially steps out of the shadows. Heinkel looks on with a rare, quiet smirk, proud to see his son claiming his rightful place. Under the bright blue sky, Klein proudly announces his full name to the entire northern faction, Klein Reinland. Meanwhile, far away from the arena, the heavy doors of a massive dark cathedral swing open. Inside, an elderly clergyman is kneeling before a grand statue, praying to the god of light for guidance through the dark paths ahead. The grand marble angel stands bathed in holy light, representing the supreme authority of the Holy Order. Suddenly, a pair of heavy, mud-stained boots walks onto the immaculate marble floor, ruining the quiet atmosphere. Priest Garrison walks into the room, calling out to the praying Cardinal Murrock. Garrison reports that their high-priority surveillance target was recently attacked by a necromancer and a horde of undead. But the Cardinal doesn't even turn around, calmly stating that everything is going exactly according to their grand plan. The Cardinal reveals a disgusting secret. The Holy Order itself authorized the necromancer attack to incite fear in the populace, forcing them to run back to the church for salvation. He casually claims that sacrificing a few peasants is a small price to pay to revive the church's dying political power. Before the corrupt priest can finish his speech, Garrison's massive fist flies forward like a rocket. With a chilling glare, the muscular priest growls that a servant of the Holy Temple has no right to play petty political games with heretics. The Cardinal gasps for air, his eyes bulging in absolute panic as Garrison lifts him off the floor by his throat. The Cardinal begs for mercy, but the absolute unit of a priest has zero interest in hearing his excuses. With a single sickening crack, Garrison crushes the Cardinal's skull, blood splashing onto the holy angel statue. A calm, elegant voice suddenly echoes from the shadows, asking Garrison if he feels any better after that murder. An elegant man in white robes walks over the blood-stained floor, noting that Garrison has officially killed more church members than actual necromancers have. This is Palamanel, an archbishop of the Holy Order who looks like he treats a battlefield like a fashion runway. Garrison glares at him, demanding to know if this entire disgusting plot was Palaman's idea. Palaman casually denies it, claiming he merely authorized the paperwork, but mentions he brought some highly valuable information. He states that his report is directly related to Garrison's current surveillance target, Klein. Garrison clenches his fist, the sheer pressure of his anger cracking the stone floor. Palamon explains that whenever high-level necromancy is used, it inevitably leaves behind a highly specific magical residue. He pulls out a cross-shaped glass vial containing a swirling dark red liquid collected from the previous battlefield. He notes that the residue contains two entirely distinct types of forbidden magic. One is standard corpse revival, but the other is an ancient pure form of necromancy that manipulates actual souls instead of flesh. Garrison looks stunned as Palaman delivers the final terrifying conclusion. This means there were actually two entirely different necromancers present at the scene. While Dylan is hugging Klein in celebration back at the arena, the threat of the church looms closer than ever. Aaron runs toward Klein with open arms, completely unaware of the absolute storm that's about to hit them. Palaman smiles, delivering the ultimate reveal to Garrison. Their target, Klein Reinland, is officially a practicing necromancer. Under a dark, stormy night sky, a heavy rain pours over a remote crystal mine in the mountains. Inside the dark caverns, a single miner swings his pickaxe against the glowing blue crystals. The metallic clashing echoes through the quiet cave, which is usually a sign that something is about to go horribly wrong. The miner wipes the sweat from his brow, completely unaware of the massive dark shadow towering directly behind him. He turns around, his eyes widening in absolute panic as a pair of glowing red eyes glares down at him. A blood-curdling scream echoes through the valley as the entire mine entrance collapses into a pile of rubble. Meanwhile, back at the peaceful Reinland estate, our maid Erin is having a massive crisis over her sewing project. She complains that she accidentally ended up making a plush doll that looks hilariously identical to Klein's deadpan face. A week has passed since the trial, and Erin is happily playing with her goofy doll while Klein sits at his desk looking completely exhausted. Although he successfully defeated the champion, crushed the Count, and announced his existence to the world, he's currently facing a much bigger threat. And that threat is the fact that his current 15-year-old body has the physical stamina of a wet cardboard box. He sighs, telling Erin to go to sleep. Erin pouts, complaining that her young master is a meanie who always plays by himself instead of hanging out with her. Klein just ignores her, keeping his eyes glued to the heavy book in his hands. While the cover looks like a standard romantic novel to keep Erin from asking questions, the inside is a completely different story. The pages are packed with forbidden notes on human anatomy, magic circles, and complex soul-summoning formations. Taking a slow sip of his tea, Klein laments that his current body can only control 11 skeletons at once, which is a pathetic number for any serious war. On top of that, he knows Priest Garrison is actively hunting for any trace of his magic, meaning he needs to find a safe way to train without getting caught. The next day, Duke Heinkel calls Klein to his office, showing him an official report about a massive crisis at the crystal mines. The report contains rough drawings of flesh-eating monsters, commonly referred to as the undead, which immediately catches Klein's attention. Klein immediately volunteers to handle the mission, realizing this dangerous cave is the absolute perfect playground to practice his necromancy. Heinkel looks at him with genuine concern, pointing out that there have already been several civilian casualties at the site. But Klein confidently states it won't be a problem, internally smiling because this mission is a golden opportunity to investigate his rival necromancer. Just as he prepares to leave, our bodyguard Dunkel shows up with a massive smile, announcing the Duke ordered him to tag along for safety. That night, the two set up camp in the mountains, with Dunkel happily celebrating how beautiful the starry night sky looks. He proudly hands Klein a stick of freshly grilled meat, looking like he expects a 5-star review for his cooking. Dunkel smiles warmly, clearly proud of his survival skills. But as Klein looks down at the food, his face instantly goes completely blank. Because instead of a delicious dinner, Dunkel has handed him a literal lump of burnt charcoal that could probably double as a weapon. Klein realizes that while Dunkel is a legendary knight commander on the battlefield, his culinary skills are a literal threat to human life. Blushing in embarrassment, Dunkel apologizes, but Klein just sighs and offers to handle the grilling himself before they both starve. Chewing on some actual edible meat, Klein tells himself that after spending a decade running from holy knights in his past life, a little camp cooking is nothing. Dunkel watches him cook, his expression turning surprisingly serious as he stares into the fire. He notes that for a 15-year-old, Klein possesses a level of maturity, sword talent, and focus that makes absolutely no sense. Leaning forward, Dunkel drops a massive bomb, confessing that he sometimes wonders if Klein is actually the reincarnation of the Dark Lord Archimond. Klein instantly freezes, his eyes widening as he tells Dunkel to never ever repeat that joke in front of Priest Garrison unless he wants to see a murder. Dunkel just laughs, thinking it's a funny joke. Klein looks down, his mind darkening as he remembers how the world currently views his past self as a bloodthirsty demon who slaughtered millions. The campfire suddenly flares up with a loud pop, casting a bright orange light over his face. The wind howls through the trees, creating an incredibly tense, heavy atmosphere. Dunkel asks if that was just the wind, but Klein's expression is completely cold. He looks down, his face cast in deep shadow. With a chilling, quiet voice, he warns Dunkel to never speak of that matter ever again. Before Dunkel can even apologize, a loud, terrified scream echoes from the valley below. Both men immediately jump to their feet, drawing their swords as the peaceful night is completely ruined. The scene cuts to a nearby village as a massive wave of panic sweeps through the streets. Dozens of gray-skinned, mindless zombies are chasing the screaming villagers through the alleyways. The monsters snarl with glowing blue eyes, charging at the survivors with terrifying speed. Suddenly, Dunkel drops from the sky like a meteor, his blade flashing in a brilliant yellow arc that cleanly decaps several monsters. He calls out to Klein, shocked by the massive scale of the zombie horde. But Klein just stands in the middle of the chaos, his sword glowing with a soft purple light as he easily parries an incoming attack. He looks back at his bodyguard, calmly asking him what on earth he's doing just standing there. He orders Dunkel to focus entirely on saving the screaming citizens, leaving the combat to him. With a heavy slam, another zombie head hits the dirt, instantly ended by a clean strike. Once the area is clear, the villagers thank them, but ask who they are. Dunkel proudly introduces Klein as the second young master of the heroic Reinland family. But instead of cheering, the villagers' faces immediately turn incredibly dark. Klein ignores their reaction, analyzing the zombie corpses and realizing they were animated by the exact same low-level magic used by the assassin in the forest. A young villager steps forward, sweating in absolute rage as he reveals that these attacks have been happening for over 2 months. He drops a massive truth bomb, stating that all of these mindless monsters were actually the peaceful residents of their village. Suddenly, the young man snaps, aggressively grabbing Klein by his collar and screaming to know if he's really a Reinland. He shakes the boy violently, while Dunkel tries to step in and pull the angry villager away. The villager weeps, screaming that they begged the Reinland family for help for 2 whole months, but received absolutely zero response. He points a trembling hand toward the pile of headless corpses on the stone floor. Weeping hysterically, he reveals that the specific zombie Klein just casually cut down was actually his own father. He falls to his knees, screaming to know why innocent peasants like them have to suffer such a cruel, unfair fate. Klein stands in silence as the villagers' tears fall onto the cold sand. In his mind, he hears an echo of his past life, remembering how the victims of the Empire used to scream those exact same words to Archimond. He looks down at his smooth, clean hands. With a cold, purple glare, Klein tells the weeping boy to shut up, flatly asking why any of this tragedy is supposedly his fault. The villager flinches, completely terrified by the sudden, freezing pressure radiating from the teenager. Klein points out the obvious logic. He wasn't the one who turned their families into monsters, so if they want to vent their anger, they should find the actual necromancer responsible. While Dunkel tries to calm the crowd, Klein raises his hand, a soft, beautiful blue flame erupting from his palm. He begins chanting an ancient northern spell, commanding the innocent spirits who died in sorrow to hear his voice. To Dunkel's utter shock, the headless zombie corpses on the floor suddenly begin to glow with a bright, warm blue light. Klein promises to light a guide's lantern to illuminate their dark path, commanding them to follow his guidance. Beautiful, glowing blue wisps of light begin to rise from the cold corpses, floating gently into the night sky. The entire village square is bathed in a warm, ethereal blue glow as the souls of the dead are safely separated from their corrupted flesh. The spirit of the young man's father appears in the light, flashing a peaceful, parting smile to his crying son. Ancient, runic spell circles float in the air around Klein as he completes the grand ritual. He looks up at the rising spirits, quietly whispering that he understands their final wishes. Dunkel is completely paralyzed in disbelief, instantly recognizing the legendary technique known as soul resonance. It is an incredibly holy, ancient ritual used 200 years ago during the Great Northern Plague to liberate the souls of the dead. The young villager weeps, calling out to his father's passing spirit in a wave of absolute relief. The father's soul gently dissolves into tiny, glowing particles of light, finally finding peace. Thousands of blue lights float up toward the heavens, turning the dark, stormy night into a breathtakingly beautiful scene. The heavy rain clouds slowly part, revealing a brilliant full moon shining over the valley. A few minutes later, Klein and Dunkel begin walking up the quiet mountain path toward the crystal mines. The silence between them is incredibly heavy as their boots crunch against the gravel. In a brief flashback, the young villager points them toward the mountain path, warning them that the source of the undead is deep inside the mine. Back in the present, Dunkel walks behind his young master, his expression turning extremely serious. Breaking the silence, Dunkel asks Klein what the liberated spirits whispered to him before they departed. Klein looks back with a calm, unfazed gaze, stating that they simply asked him to avenge their deaths. He steps forward, his voice cold as he notes that they also begged him to destroy the monster responsible. Dunkel stops dead in his tracks, his hands slowly reaching for the hilt of his massive broadsword. He recalls his previous joke about Klein being the reincarnation of the Dark Lord, along with Klein's intense defensive reaction. With a sharp, metallic ring, Dunkel draws his heavy steel blade under the bright moonlight. Pointing the sharp edge directly at the back of his employer's 15-year-old son, Dunkel demands the absolute truth. "You? Who exactly are you?" Back at the estate gates, the servants stare at our boy Klein, whispering about whether this quiet child is actually a cursed demon. Dunkel reflects on the rumors. To the rest of the world, Klein is a cursed child who reportedly blurted out high-level dark magic the second he left the womb. But what truly unsettled the household staff wasn't just the rumors, but the child's incredibly dark, hollow gaze. It was a cold, calculated look that felt far too ancient to belong to a normal 3-year-old boy. The household's fear officially peaked on the day a dead cat was found lying in the middle of the kitchen. The maids immediately panicked, whispering that the demon child was finally starting his dark blood sacrifices. The next day, a second dead feline was found in the backyard, throwing the entire servant staff into a quiet, paranoid frenzy. By the following morning, the count had risen to 3, and then quickly to 4. Soon, 5 dead cats were found scattered across the property. By the end of the week, the number had officially climbed to 6. With a total of 7 dead animals, the servants officially concluded that the cursed Reinland bloodline was bringing a dark plague upon the estate. Everyone immediately suspected the quiet second son, who did absolutely nothing but sit on his bed and stare blankly out the window. Dunkel remembers watching him from the doorway, trying to understand what was going on in the boy's head. Klein looked completely disconnected, showing zero interest in the terrifying rumors spreading about his name. Dunkel tried to reassure himself that the boy was simply too young to be behind such a bizarre, calculated event. He convinced himself that Klein was innocent, but decided to keep a close eye on his movements under the full moon. Late that night, a creaking door down the hallway instantly alerts Dunkel's sharp night senses. He hears soft, quiet footsteps echoing through the dark corridors of the silent mansion. Peeking around the corner, he is shocked to see young Klein walking toward the exit, carrying a single glass lantern. The wind howls through the trees outside as Dunkel quietly slips out of the mansion to follow him. Klein walks steadily into the dark forest, his hand gripping the metal handle of his glowing lantern. Dunkel notices that the young master has also strapped a standard steel sword to his leather belt. Keeping his distance, Dunkel tracks the glowing light as Klein heads down a stone-paved path deep in the woods. A black crow lets out a sharp echoing cry, flying over a massive quiet cemetery. Dunkel hides behind a tree, his mind racing as he tries to figure out why a kid would visit a graveyard at midnight. He hears a wet, squishing sound coming from behind a tall, ancient tombstone. Fearing the absolute worst, Dunkel prepares to draw his sword and investigate the source of the noise. He steps out from the shadows, calling out to the young master with a tense, worried look. But instead of a dark, unholy ritual, Dunkel finds Klein casually sitting on the grass, surrounded by all 7 dead felines. Dunkel stammers in absolute confusion while Klein calmly explains that he's currently preparing to perform proper funeral rites. Klein points to the lesions on their skin, explaining that the animals died from a highly infectious disease that is harmless to humans but fatal to beasts. He notes that if left alone, the disease would easily spread, and wild beasts would likely dig the bodies up and worsen the outbreak. Dunkel looks down at the boy's dirt-stained fingers, quietly suggesting they call a servant to handle the dirty work instead. But Klein just looks down with a soft, tired expression, stating that someone has to do this unpleasant job anyway. Dunkel stands in silence, realizing that behind the kid's cold gaze lies a surprisingly selfless heart. Back in the present, at the dark mountain path, Dunkel keeps his sword pointed at Klein's back, demanding to know his true identity. Without turning around, Klein calmly asks Dunkel if he still remembers the very first saying of their legendary ancestor, Berkel Reinland. Dunkel recites the words from memory. It is one's actions, not their roots, that define a being. Klein glances back, pointing out that this exact philosophy is the reason a poor peasant like Dunkel became captain, and why a second son like him is still alive today. He tells Dunkel that since they've spent the most time together, the choice is entirely up to him. With a completely calm look, Klein tells his bodyguard that if he truly believes he is a threat to the family, he is welcome to strike him down right now. The sharp steel blade hovers silently in the air for a tense, quiet second. Slowly, Dunkel lowers his sword, admitting that while he hasn't made his final decision, he's certainly not convinced that Klein is a threat. He declares that the only person he serves is the second young master of Reinland, not some ancient, bloodthirsty monster of history. Klein looks back over his shoulder, offering a rare, genuine thank you to his loyal knight. With their trust restored, the two turn their attention back to the dark, cavernous entrance of the crystal mine. Lighting a wooden torch, they officially step inside the cold, damp cave system. A massive, hollow skull lies half buried in the dirt, setting a highly welcoming tone for their exploration. They walk deeper into the cavern, the flickering orange fire exposing dozens of skeletal remains scattered across the floor. Dunkel sniffs the air, wrinkling his nose at the unmistakable, heavy stench of rotting flesh. A group of 7 gray-skinned, blue-eyed zombies suddenly crawls out of the shadows, snarling hungrily at the intruders. Klein steps forward, a brilliant blue magic flaring around his hands as he prepares to summon his own forces. With a low chant, he summons 3 of his elite armored skeletal soldiers into the cave. Dunkel is startled by the sudden burst of cold, dark energy behind him, quickly turning his head. Klein casually commands his squad to charge, and the skeletons sprint forward with supernatural speed. The skeletal soldiers let out a silent roar, their eyes glowing orange as they raise their sharp swords. The zombies try to fight back, but they are completely outclassed in speed and coordination. In a single, clean sweep, the skeletons slice through the incoming monsters, leaving them in neat, decapitated pieces. Dunkel is sweating in disbelief, wondering how skeletons can move with such professional, tactical coordination. Klein deadpans, asking if it's really that fascinating. The armored skeletons continue their assault, easily clearing the immediate area of any threats. Dunkel points deeper into the tunnel, urging the young master to follow him before more monsters arrive. Suddenly, a massive echoing groan of dozens of monsters echoes from the dark caverns ahead. Dunkel looks incredibly tense, warning that they are currently facing at least 40 enemies and are heavily outnumbered, but Klein just raises his glowing blue hand, starting another calm, rhythmic spell chant. He commands the fallen souls of the defeated zombies to break their current chains and submit to his authority. Dunkel watches in awe as the blue magic wraps around the dead bodies, realizing Klein is actively performing corpse conversion. A group of freshly resurrected, blue-eyed zombie soldiers rises from the floor, officially joining Klein's growing army. Klein casually notes that this basic tactic is essential when 2 necromancers are fighting for territory. The massive horde of enemy zombies suddenly charges down the tunnel, shrieking in hunger. Klein commands his new vanguard to charge, and Dunkel joins the sprint, ready to break through the front line. The 2 opposing armies clash in the middle of the dark tunnel, creating a chaotic mess of flying limbs. Klein's converted soldiers fight with brutal, unyielding strength, instantly overwhelming the wild zombies. Slashes of blue and silver light cut through the dark cave, decimating the enemy forces within seconds. Klein calmly directs the flow of combat, commanding his rearguard to support the push and keep moving forward. Zombie limbs and heads fly through the air as the disciplined line of skeletons executes a perfect tactical sweep. Skeletons cut down 3 monsters at once, proving that coordination always wins over raw numbers. Dunkel is still struggling to accept his reality, analyzing how these supposedly low-tier skeletons are moving like a highly trained military battalion. It's an absolute masterpiece of tactical necromancy, executed flawlessly by a 15-year-old boy. When the dust settles, a single drop of warm, dark blood falls from the ceiling, landing right next to their lantern. Dunkel looks up, his expression instantly turning into a look of absolute horror. He stammers, trying to understand how they just wiped out a force 4 times their size without taking a single casualty. Klein looks back with a serious expression, reminding Dunkel of his promise to believe in him until the very end. They continue forward, stepping into a massive, wide-open cavern deep within the mine system. A splash of warm blood suddenly lands right on Dunkel's cheek, forcing him to stop. He looks up, his hand catching a drop of blood as a quiet, agonizing groan echoes from above. Dunkel raises his torch, his voice shaking as he calls out to see if there is an actual survivor. In the flickering orange firelight, he sees a dirty, blood-stained face hanging limply from a rope. The poor man barely whispers, begging them to end his life and stop the pain. Dunkel gasps as the torch illuminates the ceiling. Dozens of missing villagers are currently hanging like meat, alive but being drained of their life force. Klein analyzes the horrific scene, explaining that these poor people were kidnapped and are actively being used as living batteries to fuel a massive reanimation spell. A slow, heavy footstep suddenly echoes from the dark tunnel ahead, accompanied by a smug, mocking laugh. A stunning woman dressed in an incredibly expensive black and gold corset and long brown cloak steps into the light. She sneers, noting that the young master understands the mechanics of high-quality reanimation magic surprisingly well. Slowly lowering her dark hood, she flashes a wicked, beautiful grin. Revealing her long, curly, red hair, she looks directly at Klein and welcomes back the legendary Devil of the Continent, Lord Archimond. Meanwhile, a hilarious flashback takes us back to the end of the previous duel, where Erin is loudly celebrating. She happily holds up a massive chocolate chip cookie, presenting it as a reward for her young master's hard work. Walking outside the grand public arena, Dunkel praises Klein's spectacular victory in the trial by combat. Dunkel suggests they head straight to Heinkel's office to report, while Erin happily skips ahead, singing about her delicious cookies. Suddenly, Klein stops, his sharp eyes narrowing as he glances back toward a tall stone wall. He shakes it off, thinking he simply imagined a presence watching them from the shadows. But behind that exact wall, a massive wave of panic is currently underway. The legendary blonde spear commander Leia is currently clutching her chest, blushing furiously and wondering why she's hiding like an embarrassed schoolgirl. For context, the word necromancer originally meant corpse divination, referring to those who summoned ancient spirits to receive holy guidance. But after a single, terrifying historical event, the entire profession was permanently branded as a symbol of absolute evil. That event was the Archimond incident, where a massive army of tens of millions of undead systematically devastated the entire continent. The apocalyptic war only ended when the legendary hero Berkel Reinland sliced off Archimond's head, saving humanity. Since then, aspiring dark mages have tried to recreate that power, but their research has been strictly limited to basic reanimation. Consequently, modern necromancers have been reduced to second-rate magicians who can barely control a handful of mindless zombies. Back in the present, the red-haired woman introduces herself as Pale, a professional necromancer who is thrilled to meet her idol. She stands confidently in the center of the dark cavern, her long black cloak fluttering in the cold wind. Dunkel and Klein stand ready on the other side of the stone floor, analyzing her movements. Dunkel looks incredibly tense, whispering to Klein that the woman possesses a ridiculously massive pool of mana. A dark, blood-red magic suddenly erupts around Pale, casting a sinister glow over her beautiful face. Klein analyzes her aura, noting that she has infused high-level magic directly into her soft robes, a technique only the most elite mages can execute. Annoyed by her arrogance, Dunkel draws his sword and points it at her, warning her to stop insulting the young master with names like Archimond. Pale casually claps her hands, giggling that she was merely playing around and didn't mean to offend the young noble. But her expression turns cold as she states she easily felt Klein's unique magi, proving he is a practicing necromancer just like her. She stares intensely at his sword, her lip curling into a look of absolute disgust. She points out that for a real necromancer, relying on a physical tool like a sword is an absolute disgrace. Dunkel yells at her to shut up, demanding to know what she did to the missing villagers and who is funding her research. But Pale just looks down with a smug smirk, repeating that a true master of death does not rely on cheap steel to fight. She opens her mouth, a thick stream of dark forbidden magi pouring out of her throat like black liquid. The dark magic wraps around the hanging villagers, draining their life force in a single, painful wave. The poor victims shriek in absolute agony as their eyes turn pitch black under the unholy spell. The raw energy is pulled directly into a massive, swirling black vortex in the middle of the cave. Dozens of dark, spectral hands reach out of the portal, shrieking in a horrifying chorus of the damned. Fanning the flames of her own ego, Pale proudly offers to show them the true meaning of high-level necromancy. She presents her life's work, a terrifying masterpiece that she spent decades researching and building. Out of the dark portal, a colossal, muscular arm covered in sharp claws slams heavily onto the stone floor. A massive, horrifying footclaw follows, crushing the solid rock into dust. With a loud, wet squish, a colossal monstrosity synthesized from dozens of screaming human bodies rises from the dark. Dunkel is sweating in absolute panic, staring up at a beast that defies all laws of nature. He analyzes the creature's single, massive eye, realizing they are officially facing a synthesized cyclops. The towering, flesh golem let out a deafening roar, its body a grotesque mosaic of fused arms, faces, and writhing muscles. Pale sweet-talks the monster like a baby, petting its giant chin and apologizing for keeping it locked away for so long. Her expression turns murderous as she commands her baby to crush the two intruders into a flat pulp. The Cyclops slams its massive foot down, charging forward with a speed that makes absolutely no sense for its giant size. The beast leaps into the air, its shadow completely swallowing our heroes. Dunkel barely has time to react, shocked by the monster's high-speed movement. He yells for Klein to watch out, frantically reaching out to pull the young master back. But instead of running, Klein's hand reaches out and pushes Dunkel backward to save him from the direct impact. Dunkel's eyes widen in shock as he realizes what the young master is doing. He is pushed out of the danger zone, while the giant's massive fist descends directly onto Klein. The impact lands with explosive force, throwing Klein hard across the cave floor. The solid stone walls shatter from the sheer force of the shockwave, throwing dust everywhere. Klein slowly sits up from the rubble, coughing as his body takes a massive, painful hit. Blood drips from his mouth, but his expression remains completely cold and calculated as he wipes it away. The Cyclops lets out a wet growl, stepping forward to finish the job. It stands triumphantly over the injured boy, preparing to stomp him into the ground. The giant foot descends, but right on cue, a yellow flash of light cuts through the darkness. Dunkel leaps onto the beast's leg, his sword flashing in a furious, clean arc. Gritting his teeth in pure rage, the knight growls at the monster to stay away from his young master. With a powerful vertical strike, Dunkel cleanly cuts through the beast's giant foot, spraying dark blood across the stone. Klein looks up, slightly surprised by his bodyguard's sudden, explosive speed. Pale's eyes widen in brief surprise as she watches her creation's limb hit the floor. The giant monster wobbles, letting out a painful shriek as its massive body hits the ground. But Pale merely lets out a mocking, slow clap, completely unimpressed by the knight's effort. She smugly praises his strike, but warns him that his basic talent is utterly useless against her masterpiece. A disgusting, wet, squelching sound echoes through the cave as thick, dark flesh begins to writhe. Dunkel watches in horror as the giant's severed leg completely regrows to its original size in a matter of seconds. The fully healed Cyclops swings its massive arm, hitting Dunkel with a strike that sends him flying. As Dunkel is thrown back, his mind is flooded with a massive wave of guilt and determination. He remembers Klein pushing him out of the way, realizing the young master sacrificed his own body to save his knight. He curses himself, feeling incredibly ashamed for ever doubting the young master's character or suspecting him of being a demon. Landing gracefully on his feet, Dunkel's eyes burn with a dangerous golden light. He declares that there is only one way to repay this debt, and that is to protect the young master with his actual life. With a powerful battle cry, Dunkel charges back into the fray, his sword clashing against the giant's massive fists. He strikes the monster 5 times in rapid succession, but the flesh simply writhes and heals instantly. Gritting his teeth, Dunkel curses the beast's ridiculous high-speed regeneration. He blocks a massive punch, the impact throwing sparks across the sand. Using the giant's arm as a springboard, Dunkel runs straight up the beast's body toward its head. He zips past the giant's massive claws, aiming his blade directly at the creature's giant eye. He leaps high into the air, bringing his sword down in a final crushing vertical strike. Screaming with everything he has, he drives the blade straight into the monster's face. But right before the impact lands, the Cyclops' massive fist moves like a blur, catching Dunkel mid-air. Dunkel's eyes widen in horror as his strike is completely stuffed. The beast slams him hard into the solid stone wall, the impact cracking his armor. A massive explosion of rubble and dust fills the cavern as Dunkel takes a direct, devastating hit. His body falls limply from the wall, his sword clattering onto the floor as he loses consciousness. He hits the ground with a dull thud, completely knocked out and severely injured. Pale watches with a highly satisfied look, deeply moved by the absolute perfection of her creation. She boasts that her decades of forbidden research and human experiments have officially surpassed the singularity. She claims she's achieved what no other dark mage in history could ever dream of. Her creation is a perfect, flawless variant that is structurally immune to any standard physical attack. She lets out a loud, maniacal laugh, her face contorting in pure, unhinged arrogance. She screams that not even the legendary Dark Lord Archimond himself could ever create a beast as perfect as her Cyclops. She proudly declares that her knowledge has officially surpassed the legend, while her monster prepares to step on the unconscious Dunkel. Suddenly, a slow, calm footstep echoes from the rubble as Klein slowly steps back into the light. Completely unfazed, Klein calmly explains that a synthesized Cyclops requires a core connection point to function. He notes that the second key is the core suture, which acts as the main pathway to send formula signals to regenerate limbs. He casually points out that hitting the limbs like Dunkel did is a complete waste of time. To kill a Cyclops, all you have to do is locate and smash its single magic core. Licking the blood from his thumb, Klein looks up with a sinister, cold smile, asking her where exactly she hid that core. A diagram displays the glowing golden sphere representing the Cyclops' vital energy core. Because the core is a single vital point linked to the beast's life, Pale didn't leave it in one place. She grins wickedly, explaining that the core constantly wanders through the beast's body like blood flowing through veins, making it impossible to target. She waves her hand, claiming that in the face of her revolutionary talent, Klein is absolutely nothing. With a sharp command, she orders her beast to crush the annoying silver-haired brat once and for all. The massive beast swings its giant claw down, the shadow completely swallowing Klein's small frame. Klein just smiles, his mind flashing back to his past life as Archimond. He remembers slicing through and destroying literally thousands of these exact same cyclopes during the Great War. He remembers the exact physical sensation of reading the cores flow through the muscles, a feeling as vivid as if it happened yesterday. In a single blinding flash of purple and pink magic, Klein's blade moves with absolute godlike precision. Pale's eyes widen in absolute freezing shock as her brain fails to comprehend what she's seeing. With a single clean slash of his sword, Klein cuts straight through the wandering core inside the monster's leg. The colossal flesh golem is split cleanly in half, its massive body starting to crumble into dust. The golden, glowing magic core shatters with a loud, clean crack. In a blinding explosion of gold dust, the entire monster is completely erased from existence. Pale stands frozen in silence, her mouth open as her life's masterpiece is turned into literal sand in a single second. Standing in the dust with glowing blue eyes, Klein flashes a terrifying, cold smirk, mockingly suggesting she pick up a new hobby in her next life. Death is often compared to falling asleep, a quiet, peaceful escape where the weight of life is finally lifted from your shoulders. Unless, of course, you spent your living hours doing sketchy necromancy, in which case the afterlife is going to feel like a very awkward corporate performance review. Our rogue red-haired necromancer Pale slowly opens her eyes, expecting the peaceful dark. Instead, she is greeted by a cold, dark void, and her survival instincts immediately begin screaming at full volume. She reaches down only to realize she's sitting on a dark, reflective pool of water with ripples spreading out from her hands. Looking up, she sees rows of massive black coffins hovering in the air above her like some twisted Gothic architecture. She leaps to her feet, demanding to know what kind of terrifying domain she has been dragged into, only for a cold voice to answer from the shadows. A familiar, terrifying face looms over her, calmly explaining that this is the place beyond the living world where all departed souls must eventually arrive. Pale completely loses her cool, splashing around in the dark water and screaming that this whole afterlife setup has to be some kind of sick joke. Standing tall with a massive scythe in hand, the dark figure tells her that her desperate demands to leave prove she still hasn't grasped the gravity of her situation. He looks down at her with cold, empty eyes, asking if she is ready to begin. Pale breaks into a cold sweat as his chilling voice announces that it is time for her to stand trial for her sins. He raises his massive scythe, declaring that this judgment is being held in the legendary name of Archimond. The absolute terror of that statement echoes through the dark void, leaving Pale completely frozen in place. Her mind races in pure panic because every single dark mage knows that name. It's literally the golden standard in their textbooks and a historic disaster for the rest of humanity. We are talking about the literal monarch of death, the devil of the continent, and the undisputed beginning and end of all necromancy. The king of necromancers points a dark armored finger at her, demanding that she step forward. Pale gasps in sheer terror as she realizes she has absolutely zero say in the matter. Her legs move completely on their own, walking across the dark water toward him while she desperately asks why her body isn't listening to her. Archimond lists her crimes with absolute coldness, reminding her how she turned innocent villagers into living batteries and tortured them just to satisfy her own scientific curiosity. Pale clutches her head, screaming in denial because the history books clearly stated that the legendary Archimond was executed 200 years ago. She remembers the historical accounts of his head being severed, trying to find any logical loophole to explain why she is talking to a dead legend. But Archimond doesn't care about her history lesson, pointing out that she even had the audacity to use the dead as mindless tools. He glares down at her, delivering a line that would make any villain regret their entire life choices. He tells her that from this moment on, she will be the one serving as his personal tool, as the giant black coffins above them slowly creak open. Before she can even attempt to run, Pale's feet are suddenly lifted off the ground by an invisible, suffocating force. She flails wildly in the air, desperately begging for a single minute to negotiate. She screams out, asking what on earth he means by turning her into a tool. Her questions are cut short as she is forcefully shoved backward into one of the open floating metal coffins. She clawingly reaches out, letting out a final desperate scream as the heavy iron door begins to slam shut on her face. The heavy lid locks into place, and she can only scream for mercy from inside her pitch-black metal prison. Archimond looks at the sealed casket, telling her that if she is afraid of dying, she can rest easy. He promises her that they will be meeting again very soon, swinging his scythe with a lethal, blinding flash. The blade slices cleanly through the air, delivering a spiritual strike that cuts right through the metal coffin. Pale lets out an agonizing, tearful scream as the cold strike tears through her consciousness. Her eyes snap open to the cold, damp stone ceiling of the crystal mine, her breath coming in ragged, terrified gasps. Tears stream down her face as she tries to convince herself that the terrifying executioner was nothing more than a highly detailed nightmare. She whispers to herself that she is still alive, only for a very confused, sweat-dropping Dunkel to stare down at her like he's looking at a biological anomaly. Pale screams in pure horror as she looks down and realizes she is literally just a talking, severed head resting casually on the dirt. Klein looks down at her with a deadpan expression, completely unfazed by the fact that he is currently babysitting a decapitated dark mage. Dunkel looks from the severed head to his young master, his mind completely breaking as he realizes Klein managed to pull off this terrifying magical feat all by himself. Klein casually crouches down next to the screaming head, telling Dunkel it is time to start the interrogation. Pale hyperventilates, screaming at the top of her lungs, demanding to know what kind of twisted magic has left her alive in this state. Klein calmly asks her if she is finally ready to stop screaming and have a rational conversation. He leans in closer, suggesting that she should probably take a good look at her current lack of a body and realize she doesn't have much leverage here. Pale freezes, staring up at him as a sudden, horrifying realization starts to dawn on her. That cold, aristocratic voice is the exact same one that was just lecturing her in the dark void. As the shadow of Archimond looms behind the young boy, Klein smiles, reminding her that he promised they would meet again very soon. Pale's eyes dilate in absolute terror as she realizes the rumors about the talentless second son of House Reinland were in fact incredibly understated. She opens her mouth to scream his legendary name, but Klein swiftly presses his finger against her lips to shut her up. He gives her a quiet warning to keep her voice down, because keeping secrets is a crucial part of his daily routine. With a faint purple glow of magi swirling around his hand, Klein tells her that he is currently in desperate need of some solid information. He asks her who sent her to the north, how many other dark mages are currently operating, where they were dispatched, and what their ultimate goal is. He gives her a very simple choice: cooperate and receive a quick, painless death, or refuse and be granted eternal life. Pale looks at him with trembling eyes, asking if his definition of eternal life means remaining a talking severed head on a dirt floor forever. Klein offers a very simple single-word confirmation, leaving her to grit her teeth in absolute despair. He leans down, looking into her eyes as he dryly asks how long she thinks she can hold out before she starts singing. Sometime later, Dunkel is diligently writing everything down in a notebook, looking like a very stressed secretary taking minutes at a dark guild meeting. He reports that he has successfully written down every single detail of her confession, while Klein sits casually on a rock like they didn't just break a dark mage's psyche. Klein stands up, dusting off his suit and saying he is officially done with this damp, smelly mine. Pale's head starts rolling around in panic, screaming about what is going to happen to her now that she has given them everything. She desperately reminds him that she answered every single question exactly as she was ordered to. Klein stops, turning back to her with a smile that can only be described as highly untrustworthy. He reminds her that he did in fact promise to kill her if she cooperated, leaving her to let out a sigh of relief that her torment is finally ending. Klein gathers a swirling ball of blue, glowing energy, reassuring her that he is a man who always keeps his promises. He raises his hand over her severed head, letting the magic gently wash over her. But then, he casually tells her that she just needs to hold out and survive for about a week. Pale looks at him in utter confusion, only to hear a terrifying rustling sound echoing from the dark corners of the mine. Klein points to the shadows, calmly explaining that his summoned assistants will be the ones taking care of the actual killing process. Pale gasps in pure horror as a massive, writhing army of giant cockroaches floods out of the crevices, heading straight for her. She lets out a blood-curdling scream as the insects begin swarming over her face, biting into her flesh. As her agonizing screams echo through the caverns, Klein looks back with a cold smirk, thanking her for being such a useful tool. Pale's vision starts to fade as the bugs swarm her eyes, her mind completely shattered by the absolute cruelty of the ancient Dark Lord. She screams Archimond's name in pure hatred one last time as Klein and Dunkel calmly stroll out of the mine like they just finished a pleasant afternoon walk. Meanwhile, we cut back to the majestic Reinland estate, standing tall under a bright blue sky, completely oblivious to the horror show that just occurred in the mountains. Inside his lavish study, Duke Heinkel is carefully reading through the detailed report of the mine incident, looking incredibly grave. He looks up, muttering about how the Empire has apparently unleashed rogue necromancers in their northern territory, while the Holy Order turned a complete blind eye to the crisis. He stares directly at his young son, asking if every single detail in this terrifying report is actually true. Klein stands perfectly straight, confirming that they found over 150 undead in that mine alone, and that the local corrupt nobles are far too busy with political power struggles to care. Heinkel doesn't hesitate, immediately ordering his butler, Berkman, to dispatch the Reinland Night Order to clean up the remaining nests and request border reinforcements. He looks at Klein with genuine pride in his eyes, telling him that he has done an incredibly great thing for the safety of the territory. Klein plays the role of the humble, talentless son perfectly, claiming it was mostly a stroke of luck and that he would have died if Dunkel hadn't been there to protect him. In reality, Klein is desperately hoping Dunkel keeps his mouth shut about the massive skeletal army he summoned to solo the dungeon. Heinkel nods, opening his desk drawer to retrieve a small velvet-lined box. He tells Klein that he originally planned to test him with a few more tedious missions, but his performance in the mine has proven that there is absolutely no need for that. He places a sleek black metallic wolf badge on the desk, the official token of a Reinland knight. He tells Klein that for now, he will officially start as an apprentice knight, though he admits that this rank is honestly a bit insulting considering what the boy just accomplished. Klein picks up the gleaming wolf badge with a satisfied smirk, telling his father that this is more than enough for his current plans. Heinkel stares at him, quietly analyzing the sheer confidence radiating from his supposedly talentless second son. He softens his expression, dismissing Klein so the boy can finally get some well-deserved rest after his harrowing mission. The heavy, ornate doors of the study click shut as Klein steps out into the hallway. The elderly butler, Berkman, notes that defeating 70 undead, a giant golem, and an armed necromancer in a closed space is an absurd feat, even with Dunkel's help. Heinkel agrees, ordering him to send a letter to his brother. Berkman is taken aback, knowing Heinkel's brother is a recluse who doesn't show up for just anyone, but Heinkel insists he will come once he hears the message. The message is simple and incredibly hyped. The absolute genius you have been searching for your entire life is standing right here. Walking through the mansion, Klein smiles to himself, amused by his new official title of Apprentice Knight. He notes that unlike the main estate where visitors can enter freely, the Knight Barracks are a highly secure military zone. This is the perfect defense because even a hyper-muscular monster like Priest Garrison won't be able to barge in and bother him without official military clearance. He looks down at his new wolf badge, reinforcing his resolve to restore the Reinland family to its absolute peak, if only to secure a peaceful life for himself. He starts planning his next logical steps, only to hear the loud, rapid thumping of footsteps echoing down the hallway. Before he can even react, his hyperactive red-haired maid, Erin, launches herself at him like a guided missile, tackle-hugging him with enough force to warp space. Klein groans in agony, clutching his lower back and complaining that his enthusiastic maid just shattered his 7th vertebra. Erin puffs out her cheeks in annoyance, crossed arms, asking if he honestly thinks she only visits him when she wants chocolate chip cookies. Klein deadpans, pointing out the cookie crumbs clearly visible on her mouth before pointing her in the direction of the kitchen to get a refill. Erin gasps, remembering her actual highly urgent message. Priest Garrison has just arrived at the estate. Klein's feet freeze mid-step, his mind instantly locking up. His jaw tenses as the sheer trauma of his childhood purification rituals flashes before his eyes. He instantly recalls the terrifying images of Garrison's brutal physical training and the holy explosions that pulverized monsters into dust. He remembers the scarred, terrifying face of the priest, who spent 7 years trying to find a demon inside his infant body. Suddenly, a massive, imposing shadow looms over him from behind as a terrifyingly familiar voice asks if his mission went well. Klein slowly turns his head, a cold sweat breaking out across his face as he prepares to face his ultimate childhood nightmare. Standing tall in his high-collared robes, Priest Garrison looks down at him with a dark, predatory grin, welcoming the young master back.
Part 2, Chapter 13 Recap Script.
When you are a reincarnated Dark Lord, you expect to deal with a lot of issues, but nobody prepares you for the absolute terror of a hyper-aggressive priest who refuses to let you skip your daily beating. We flash back to several years ago, where a group of panicked estate servants are running through the dense forest, desperately searching for a missing young Klein. The search party looks completely exhausted, murmuring to each other that they haven't found a single trace of the young master on their side of the woods. One of the servants looks up at a massive tree, shouting that it is almost time for the daily purification ritual and that Father Garrison is starting to lose his patience. Hiding high up in the leafy branches, a young Klein glares down, thinking that Garrison's definition of forgiveness usually involves tying him up and hanging him from a rope. The servants eventually give up and head back toward the mansion, leaving the young boy to sigh in relief as he watches them go. Night quickly falls over the northern forest, the wind whistling through the dark, leafy canopy. Exhausted from hiding all day, the young boy curls up on a thick branch and quickly drifts off to sleep under the starlight. He suddenly jolts awake with a gasp, having just experienced a vivid nightmare of Priest Garrison finding his hiding spot. He looks up at the crescent moon, realizing he fell asleep for several hours in the freezing cold. He climbs down the trunk, deciding that the search parties must have gone to bed by now and it's finally safe to sneak back into his room. But as his feet touch the cold ground, he suddenly stops, his eyes widening in pure shock. Standing right in front of him are two massive black-furred northern grizzly bears, growling fiercely in the dark. These giant beasts are the absolute apex predators of the northern wilderness, known for being incredibly aggressive. Their massive, razor-sharp claws are built specifically for shredding and deboning anything made of meat. Since he can't use necromancy without instantly exposing his identity to the entire estate, young Klein realizes he is currently nothing more than a bite-sized snack, forcing him to scramble back up the tree. He huddles against the trunk, shivering violently as the freezing northern wind cuts straight through his thin clothes. He clenches his fists, feeling an overwhelming wave of bitterness as he remembers how he sacrificed everything in his past life to protect the Northerners. And yet, he was reborn into the family of Berkel Reinland, the very man who executed him, and is still forced to live a pathetic life on the run from wild animals and zealots. He lets out a quiet, trembling sigh, hugging his knees tightly to keep from freezing to death on the branch. He closes his eyes as his mind drifts back to the past, remembering the angry mobs of his previous life screaming for the execution of the terrible Archimond. He remembers the whispers of the fearful nobles, declaring his very existence to be a cursed plague upon the continent. The freezing cold slowly numbs his body, and his consciousness begins to slip away into the dark. His eyes half open, staring blankly as his body heat drops to a dangerous level. The next thing he knows, he is being carried on a broad, muscular back through the snowy woods. He blinks, recognizing the sharp, scarred profile of Priest Garrison looking back at him. Klein weakly asks if he has finally frozen to death and ended up in hell, but Garrison just chuckles, explaining that he simply found him passed out in a tree. Klein points out that there were literally two massive apex predators waiting at the bottom of that tree, but Garrison calmly smiles, pointing to the two giant bear carcasses he effortlessly pulverized in the background. Klein tells him to put him down, claiming he'd rather freeze than be carried, but Garrison firmly tells him to shut up and stay still because he is currently burning up with a dangerous fever. Klein stares at him, genuinely confused, asking why the priest even bothered saving his life when he clearly wants him dead more than anyone. Garrison remains quiet for a long moment, his expression turning unusually solemn under the moonlight. He looks up at the night sky, quietly noting that a star does not create the darkness around it. It simply does its best to shine exactly where it is placed in the vast night. He explains that a young, innocent life is exactly the same. They are born blank, without any inherent understanding of right or wrong. He looks back at the young boy, stating that as a priest, he has absolutely no right to cut off the potential of a growing child. Klein looks at him, highly skeptical that the man who regularly dunks him in freezing garlic baths is lecturing him about child potential. But then, Garrison's tone turns ice cold, warning him that if that young being actively chooses to dive into the dark and becomes the real Archimond he is hunting, the cold wind rustles through the bare branches, carrying a heavy, suffocating tension. A dry leaf snaps off a branch, disintegrating into tiny dust particles as it falls. Garrison glares at him with terrifying intensity, promising that if that day ever comes, he will personally execute him with his own two hands. We snap back to the present day in the brightly lit mansion hallway, where the memory of that promise hangs heavily in the air. Garrison offers a deceptively warm smile, greeting the young master and noting that it has indeed been quite a while. Klein breaks into a cold sweat, keeping his posture perfect as he politely greets the priest back. Garrison explains that he had some highly urgent business back at the Holy Order, where an old friend gifted him a very fascinating little toy. He pulls out a cross-shaped glass vial containing a thick, glowing red liquid. Ectoplasm, a high-grade tool designed specifically to detect spiritual and demonic residue. Garrison notes that during the forest ambush, a rogue necromancer was spotted attempting to raise the dead. He reminds Klein of the masked assassin who was using low-level reanimation magic. He mentions how he personally took care of that trash, crushing his skull on the spot. He steps closer, the heavy thud of his boot echoing through the hallway as he notes that according to this highly accurate church device, there was a massive anomaly at the scene. He leans in, whispering that the ectoplasm detected the distinct magical residue of not one, but two completely separate necromancers. His voice remains calm, but Klein can hear the terrifying, rapid thumping of his own heart as his ancient survival instincts begin screaming at him to run. His mind races through a black and white swirl of panic, realizing he is currently cornered by the most dangerous man on the continent. His ancient intuition, honed through 100 years of warfare, is flashing a massive red warning sign in his mind. He desperately calculates his odds of survival, wondering if he can copy Garrison's techniques, only to realize it is physically impossible because he wouldn't survive the first hit required to analyze them. Garrison glares at him, his yellow eyes glowing with absolute malice as he demands that Klein perform necromancy right here and now. He tells Klein that out of respect for their 7 years together, he is offering him a single final opportunity to prove his innocence. He warns him that if his magic is just simple run-of-the-mill corpse manipulation, he might let him off with a trial, but if it is the legendary soul manipulation of that man, he looks at him with absolute certainty, promising that the boy will not leave this hallway alive. Klein is momentarily taken back to the past, seeing the angry faces of the holy knights who executed him 2 centuries ago. He looks up, a bitter smile forming on his face as he mocks the priest for spending 7 years torturing him under the convenient excuse of a purification ritual. But then, Klein chuckles, noting that it is incredibly funny because someone else he used to know used to say those exact same poetic words. He recalls the handsome, golden-haired face of his ancient rival, Berkel Reinland, who executed him while talking about protecting the children's future. He admits that when Garrison carried him out of the freezing forest years ago, he actually understood, just for a brief second, the weird form of justice the priest believed in. Garrison's eyes widen in genuine shock as the young boy speaks with the exact tone and wisdom of a centuries-old war veteran. Klein remembers his past defeat, admitting to himself that he lost that ancient war simply because he wasn't strong enough. But he clenches his fist, resolving that his second life is not going to end in the exact same pathetic way. He looks Garrison dead in the eye, telling him to cut the hypocritical speech. He declares that he will be the sole author of his own destiny, and that he is officially done running away from his past. Garrison closes his eyes for a brief second, letting out a heavy sigh before his face hardens into pure aggression. He drops the glass vial of ectoplasm, stating that if the boy refuses to cooperate, he will simply have to beat the magic out of him. With his eyes glowing a blinding white, Garrison launches a monstrous, high-speed punch straight at Klein's face. Klein's reflexes kick in at full speed as he realizes he has to dodge this terrifying strike by any means necessary. Using his perfect physical efficiency, he drops his center of gravity, preparing to slide underneath the incoming fist. The massive fist barrels forward, creating a deafening sonic boom that tears through the air just inches above Klein's head. Klein focuses every single muscle in his body, pushing himself to the absolute limit to pull off the high-speed dodge. He slides gracefully across the polished stone floor as Garrison's punch misses by a hair, the sheer wind pressure shattering the nearby windows. Garrison's eyes widen in genuine surprise as he realizes the 15-year-old boy actually managed to cleanly dodge his signature high-speed strike. Klein lets out a breath, realizing his intensive physical training has finally paid off. The dropped ectoplasm vial smashes on the stone floor behind them, splashing the thick, dark red liquid everywhere. The loud shattering sound and the deafening shockwave instantly alert the nearby mansion servants, who let out terrified screams. The servants run into the hallway, completely horrified to see their esteemed high priest actively trying to murder the young master in broad daylight. Sensing a golden opportunity, Klein decides to go on the offensive while Garrison is momentarily distracted by the screaming servants. He reaches down to draw his sword, only to freeze in sheer shock as Garrison stands before him, casually holding Klein's weapon in his gloved hand. Klein stares at his empty scabbard, his mind racing to comprehend how the priest managed to disarm him so quickly. Garrison effortlessly spins the stolen sword, tossing it aside like a useless piece of metal. He dryly comments that a true necromancer has absolutely no business hiding behind a knight's steel sword anyway. Klein's jaw tenses as he looks into the priest's cold, unyielding eyes, realizing the man is fully prepared to execute him right here in the family mansion. Garrison raises his massive fist once more, this time charging it with a blinding, crackling aura of pure golden holy mana. He swings his fist down with absolute destructive force. A massive, catastrophic holy explosion erupts through the hallway, completely obliterating the stone pillars and sending massive chunks of rubble flying everywhere. The sheer power of the blast tears through the architecture of the mansion, turning the entire hallway into a smoking crater of dust and debris. The terrified servants are thrown backward by the explosive shockwave, coughing through the thick, suffocating smoke. Dust and ash fill the air as the remaining structures of the ceiling begin to creak and collapse. Garrison stands amidst the smoking ruins, calmly brushing the dust off his robes while the panicked servants scream to call the royal guards. He narrows his eyes, peering through the settling dust cloud to confirm the kill. As the smoke clears, a tall, imposing figure in a white suit steps forward, effortlessly blocking Garrison's path with a massive, gleaming golden sword. Duke Klein Reinland stands tall in front of his son, his blue eyes glowing with absolute fury as he coldly demands that the priest explain why he is currently trying to murder a member of the Reinland family on his own estate.